Power doesn't break you when you lose it. It breaks you when you realize you never had it at all. King Darius Valor, ruler of the most feared empire in existence, just learned that truth the hard way. One scent, one woman, one moment where destiny slapped him across the face and said, "You don't get to choose this." And what did the almighty Alpha King do? He said no. He rejected his fated mate in front of the entire court. Now the bond is rotting inside him like a wound that won't close. His kingdom is circling him like vultures, and the woman he threw away? She's building an army of the broken. This is the story of a man who had everything and chose nothing. Stay until the end. You'll want to see how far a king can fall before he finally hits ground. And hey, smash that like button and drop your city in the comments. Let me know where my pack is watching from. The throne room of Dravarin smelled like old blood and older money. Darius Valor sat on the obsidian seat his grandfather had carved from a mountain's heart. One leg crossed over the other, fingers drumming a slow rhythm against the armrest. The sound echoed through the vaulted chamber like a heartbeat. Everything echoed in this place. That was the point. You were supposed to feel small here, supposed to remember that kings were made of stone and you were made of meat. He'd been king for 11 years. 11 years of holding the crown so tight his knuckles had gone white. 11 years of making sure no one ever saw him sweat, bleed, or hesitate. Because the second you showed weakness in Dravarin, the second you let them see the man instead of the myth, they'd tear you apart and sell the pieces to the highest bidder. And Darius had worked too damn hard to let that happen. The royal convocation was in full swing around him. Nobles from every corner of the empire packed the hall like well-dressed wolves, dripping in silk and ambition. They smiled with their mouths and schemed with their eyes. Darius had learned to read both languages fluently. Lord Cormac, positioned near the eastern wing, hadn't stopped glancing at Duchess Marin all night. An alliance in the making, probably over grain rights or mining contracts. Lady Thessa kept adjusting her emerald necklace, a nervous tell that meant she was about to make a move on the shipping routes. Baron Silas stood too close to the council's war advisor, which meant someone was getting ready to push for military expansion into the border territories. Politics. It never stopped, never slept, never gave you a moment to breathe without calculating the cost. Darius didn't mind. He was good at it, better than good. He could see 10 moves ahead, anticipate betrayals before they formed in the minds of would-be traitors, crush dissent before it found a voice loud enough to matter. Control was his native language, and he spoke it with the fluency of a man who'd never known any other way to survive. But then the air shifted. It was subtle at first. A change in pressure, like the moment before lightning strikes. A warmth that didn't belong in the cold stone hall. Darius felt it in his chest before he smelled it, something that bypassed his brain entirely and went straight to the part of him that was all instinct and hunger and primal recognition. Honeysuckle and rain. His head snapped up so fast his neck cracked. Across the hall, moving through the crowd like she didn't know she was about to shatter the world into pieces too small to put back together, was a woman. She wasn't dressed like the others. No silk that cost more than a house. No jewelry that could feed a village for a year. Just a simple gray dress that looked like it had been worn too many times and mended too many nights by lamplight. Her dark hair was pulled back in a braid that had come loose at the edges, strands escaping to frame a face that was more interesting than beautiful. Sharp cheekbones. A mouth that looked like it forgot to smile often. Eyes that held storms. She carried a leather satchel across her shoulder. Medical supplies, if he had to guess. A healer, then. Probably hired to tend to some lord's ailing mother, or a courtier's twisted ankle, or one of 1,000 other minor ailments that the wealthy treated like catastrophes. She didn't belong here. Not in this room full of predators and power plays. Not in this world of careful words and calculated moves. And yet, the bond slammed into him like a fist to the sternum. He couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. Couldn't do anything except feel the way every nerve in his body screamed recognition, and the wolf inside him, the primal thing he kept locked down under layers of discipline and duty and iron will, surged forward with a single, undeniable truth that rewrote everything he thought he knew about himself. Mate. Darius's hands gripped the armrests hard enough to crack the obsidian, small fractures spiderwebbed out from under his palms. Someone would notice later, someone would ask questions. He didn't care. No, this wasn't possible. This couldn't be. The woman stopped walking. Her head turned, slowly, as if pulled by the same invisible thread that had just wrapped around his throat, and started squeezing. Their eyes met across 50 feet of marble and gold and the weight of an entire empire watching. Hers were gray, storm gray, the kind of gray that held lightning and thunder and the promise of rain that could either nourish or drown you. And in that instant, the bond locked into place with a finality that felt like a door slamming shut on every other possibility his life had ever held. It wasn't gentle, wasn't poetic. It was raw and absolute and overwhelming, a connection that rewrote every cell in his body and said in a voice older than civilization, "This is the only thing that matters now. Everything else is just noise." The hall went silent. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe the world was still turning and people were still talking and the convocation was still happening around them, but Darius couldn't hear any of it. All he could hear was his own heartbeat thundering in his ears and the way it had synced up with hers, two rhythms becoming one without asking permission. The court was watching now. He could feel their eyes like physical weight, could feel the shift in the room as realization spread like wildfire through dry grass. Whispers started, spread, grew. The Alpha King had just found his queen. This was supposed to be a moment of celebration, of destiny fulfilled and fate honored. In any other story, this was where he stood from his throne, crossed the room with purpose, and claimed her in front of everyone. This was where the kingdom rejoiced and the bond was sealed and fate got its happy ending tied up with a neat bow. But Darius wasn't any other king, and this wasn't any other story. He looked at her face, really looked. Saw the hope flickering there, tentative and fragile as a candle flame in wind. Saw the way her hand pressed against her chest like she was trying to hold her heart in place. Saw the slight tremble in her fingers that she couldn't quite control. And then he saw something else, a shadow in her eyes, a weight she carried that she hadn't asked for and couldn't put down, a kind of resignation that came from knowing your future was already written and the ending wasn't good. He knew that look. He'd seen it before, burned into his memory like a brand. 11 years ago, on another woman's face. Right before the lunar fracture had started eating her alive from the inside out. His jaw tightened until his teeth ached. The court was still waiting, still watching. The woman, Liana. His wolf whispered her name like a prayer, like a curse, like both at once, was still standing there in the center of the hall, frozen between hope and terror, and the dawning understanding that something was very wrong. And Darius made his choice. He stood from the throne. The movement was deliberate, controlled. Every eye in the room locked onto him. The bond pulled taut between them like a rope stretched to breaking. He could feel her on the other end of it, could feel her hope rising, desperate and dangerous. He let her feel it for one more second, and then he spoke. His voice was cold, controlled. The voice of a king who had never needed anything or anyone, who had built an empire on the foundation of never being vulnerable. "I reject you." The words fell like stones into still water, heavy, final, sending ripples that would turn into waves that would turn into tsunamis. Liana's face went white as fresh snow. Someone in the crowd gasped. Another murmured something sharp and shocked. A third made a sound like they'd been punched. But Darius didn't look away from her, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He held her gaze and let her see exactly what he was doing, let her see the calculation behind it, the cold logic that said this was the only way. He was choosing the crown. He was choosing survival. He was choosing to cut the thread before it could strangle them both. Liana's hand dropped from her chest. Her expression shifted, not to anger, not to tears, not to any of the reactions he'd braced himself for. Instead, something worse settled over her features. Dignity. The kind of dignity that came from being gutted in public and refusing to bleed where anyone could see. The kind of dignity that was harder than steel and twice as sharp. She didn't beg, didn't ask why, didn't demand an explanation or throw accusations or give him the satisfaction of breaking down. She just looked at him for a long moment, and he saw understanding dawn in those gray eyes. Understanding and something that might have been pity, which was worse than hatred could ever be. Then she nodded. Once. A small, precise movement that said, "I understand what you are. I understand what you've done. and I understand that begging won't change it." She turned, adjusted the strap of her satchel on her shoulder, and walked toward the doors with her spine straight and her head high and her heart bleeding out behind her in a trail no one else could see, but he felt in his bones. The crowd parted for her like water around a stone. No one stopped her. No one spoke. They just watched in stunned silence as the woman destined to be their queen, the woman fate itself had chosen, left the palace with the kind of grace that made her rejection look like a choice instead of a wound. The massive oak doors closed behind her with a sound like a coffin lid settling into place. Darius sat back down on his throne. The obsidian was cold against his back. It had always been cold. He'd just never noticed before. The convocation resumed around him. Conversations picked up again, quieter now, threaded through with speculation and disbelief and the kind of hungry calculation that came from seeing a king make a move no one had predicted. Lord Cormac was whispering furiously to Duchess Marin, probably already figuring out how to use this to their advantage. Lady Thessa had abandoned her necklace entirely and was staring at the throne with naked ambition written across her face. Baron Selus had a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth that Darius wanted to cut off with a dull knife. He ignored them all. His chest felt wrong, tight, like something vital had been ripped out, and the wound was still raw and bleeding and trying to close around empty space. The bond was still there. That was the thing they didn't tell you about rejection. It didn't sever the connection. It didn't cut the thread clean. It just poisoned it, turned it into a constant ache, a reminder of what you'd refused, a phantom limb that hurt worse than the real thing ever did. He could feel her even now, could sense the distance growing between them as she walked away from the palace, away from him, away from the future they were supposed to have. Could feel her pain like it was his own, sharp and bright and absolutely deserved. Good, he thought savagely, and tried to mean it. Better pain than destruction. Better this than watching her fade. Better a clean wound than a slow death. Because he knew what came next. He'd lived it once before, and he'd be damned if he lived it again. The woman he'd loved before the crown had a name. Alara. He still couldn't think it without feeling something crack open inside his chest. She'd been everything, fierce and brilliant and alive in a way that made the world seem bigger. And she'd carried the same shadow in her eyes that Lyanna now bore. The same hereditary curse that passed through bloodlines like a punishment for sins no one remembered committing. Lunar fracture. It was a disease that didn't kill the body. That would have been mercy. Instead, it killed the mind, slowly, brutally, methodically. It unraveled identity like pulling threads from a tapestry until nothing recognizable remained. It devoured memory, personality, everything that made a person who they were. It turned the woman you loved into a stranger who wore her face like a mask and looked at you with empty eyes that held no recognition. He'd watched Alara forget her own name, watched her look at him one morning and ask with genuine confusion who he was and why he was in her room. Watched her waste away in a gilded prison while the best healers in the Empire stood around useless, because there was no cure for this. There was only the slow descent into nothing. And he'd stood by, powerless. A king who could command armies and bend nations to his will, rendered completely impotent by a disease that didn't care about crowns or titles or the desperation of men who thought they controlled the world. So when Lyanna had walked into that hall tonight carrying the same curse, the same doomed future written in the shadows behind her eyes, Darius had done the only thing that made sense to a man who'd already watched this story end once. He'd cut the thread before it could strangle him a second time. It was mercy, he told himself, staring at the empty hall as nobles filtered out in clusters of whispered conspiracy. Mercy for both of them. She'd be free to live whatever life she had left without the weight of a crown crushing her, without the eyes of an empire watching her deteriorate, without the pressure of being a queen to a king who would eventually have to watch her forget his face. And he'd be free to rule without the distraction of watching another woman. He didn't finish the thought, couldn't finish it, because finishing it would mean admitting that he'd felt something in that moment when their eyes met, something that went beyond instinct or biology or the mechanical function of a mate bond, something dangerously close to recognition, to hope. And hope was a luxury kings couldn't afford. Lord Revan approached the throne, his footsteps echoing in the nearly empty hall. The head of the council was a careful man, which was why Darius kept him close. Careful men were predictable, useful. His expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp as broken glass. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, his voice pitched for privacy. That was unexpected. Darius didn't look at him. His gaze was fixed on the doors Lyanna had walked through. Unexpected. That's one word for it. "The council will want to discuss this." Revan folded his hands behind his back, the picture of diplomatic concern. "A rejected mate bond. It's unprecedented in our history. There will be questions, concerns about succession, about the stability of the line, about what message this sends to—" "Then handle them," Darius cut him off. His voice was flat. "Dead. That's what I pay you for, Revan, to handle things." Revan hesitated, and Darius could practically hear the calculations running through the man's head. How far to push? How much to say? What angle to take? "Sire," he said finally, with respect, "this isn't something that can simply be managed through policy. The bond is sacred in our culture. The people will see this as what?" Darius turned his head slowly, fixing Revan with a look that could freeze blood in veins. As weakness? As failure? As their king being ruled by something other than his own will? Revan didn't answer. "Smart man." "Exactly," Darius said, each word precise as a blade. "So we control the narrative. We frame it as strength. As a king who refuses to be ruled by fate or biology or ancient superstition, who chooses duty over desire, who puts the kingdom above personal wants." It was a good speech. He'd been composing it in his head since the moment the words, "I reject you," had left his mouth. Revan's jaw worked like he was chewing words too dangerous to speak. "And if the people don't accept that narrative, Your Majesty?" "Then they'll learn to," Darius said simply. His voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Or they'll learn what happens when they question their king's decisions." The threat hung in the air between them, unsubtle and unmistakable. Revan bowed, stiff and formal. "As you say, Your Majesty." He retreated, and Darius watched him go with the distinct feeling that he'd just made an enemy out of an ally, or maybe just revealed that the alliance had always been transactional, held together by mutual benefit rather than loyalty. It didn't matter. Enemies he could handle, enemies he understood. It was hope that had always destroyed him. Darius sat alone on his throne as the last of the nobles filed out, surrounded by opulence and utterly isolated. The bond throbbed in his chest like a second heartbeat. Wrong. Persistent, inescapable, a constant reminder that he'd broken something that wasn't meant to be broken. He closed his eyes and told himself he'd done the right thing. Told himself he'd done the only thing. Told himself that the pain would fade, that the bond would wither, that time would prove him right. But deep down, in the place where kings weren't allowed to be human, where the man lived underneath the crown, he knew the truth. He hadn't protected her by rejecting her. He just sentenced them both to a different kind of death. Slower, lonelier, but just as certain. The obsidian throne was cold beneath him. It had always been cold. He'd just never noticed before. 3 months crawled by like wounded animals. Darius threw himself into ruling with the kind of intensity that worried his advisors and terrified his servants. He worked 18-hour days, signed treaties with one hand while planning military campaigns with the other, crushed a border uprising before it could spread, negotiated trade agreements that would have taken other kings months to finalize, expanded the empire's reach into territories that had resisted Draveran influence for generations. He was everywhere, doing everything, being the perfect king, and falling apart in increments too small for anyone to notice. The bond hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, more insistent, like a wound that kept reopening before it could heal. Every night he dreamed of gray eyes and a voice that said with quiet devastation, "You chose the crown." Every morning he woke up with his chest split open and rage pouring out like blood from a severed artery. He felt her constantly, a presence at the edge of his awareness, moving, living, existing somewhere out there beyond his reach. It was driving him slowly insane. The council meetings grew tense. Whispers in the halls turned to murmurs, murmurs to open speculation. Without a queen, the line of succession was in question. Without a mate bond honored, the king's strength was in doubt. The careful structure of power Darius had built over 11 years was starting to show cracks. He felt it in every interaction. The way Lord Cormac's respect had shifted to calculation. watching and waiting for an opportunity. The way Duchess Marin now seated herself closer to the throne during assemblies, angling for influence she'd never have reached for before. The way Baron Silas had started building alliances with the southern territories, testing the waters for rebellion, seeing how far he could push before someone pushed back. They smelled blood, and Darius felt like he was drowning in it. He compensated the only way he knew how, became harder, colder, more absolute in his authority. He ruled with an iron fist wrapped in steel and dared anyone to challenge him. No one did, at least not openly. But the absence was louder than any rebellion. The empty seat beside his throne screamed louder than any accusation, and then the reports started coming in. At first they were easy to dismiss. Rumors from the outer territories, whispers about a woman who moved through the broken packs like a ghost, through the forgotten towns that existed in the margins of the Empire's awareness. A healer who offered medicine and hope in equal measure, who asked for nothing in return, who walked into places torn apart by poverty or disease or the casual cruelty of imperial expansion and somehow made them whole again. Darius read the reports with hands that didn't shake because he wouldn't let them. It's just a healer, he told himself. Just a woman doing what healers do. But then the rumors grew teeth. She wasn't just helping them, she was organizing them. The outcasts, the rejected, the wolves who'd been cast out by their packs for weakness or defiance, the humans who'd been ground under the Empire's heel and left to die in the dust, the broken pieces of society that Dravarin's expansion had created and then forgotten about. She was building something with them, not an army. That would have been easier to deal with. Armies had commanders and supply lines and tactical weaknesses. This was something worse, a movement. Darius stood in his private study late one night, staring at the map spread across his desk. Red marks indicated where Lyanna had been sighted over the past month. Someone on his intelligence network, he didn't know who, and that bothered him more than he wanted to admit, was tracking her movements and reporting them directly to him. The marks formed a pattern, a slow, deliberate circle around the capital, like a noose tightening. She wasn't running from him. She was rising in spite of him, or maybe because of him. Lord Revan stood across the desk, arms folded, his expression carved from granite. "This is a problem, sire." Darius's fingers traced one of the red marks. The paper was cool under his touch. "She's a healer, not a general, not a threat." "She's a symbol," Revan corrected, his voice hard. "A rejected queen who refuses to disappear quietly, who refuses to break or fade or do any of the things rejected mates are supposed to do. Every wolf she helps, every town she visits, every life she touches, it's a reminder of what you did, of what you refused." "What I did," Darius repeated slowly, dangerously, "was protect this kingdom from instability." "The kingdom doesn't see it that way." Revan's bluntness was one of the few honest things left in Darius's world, which was the only reason he tolerated it. They see a king who turned his back on fate, who rejected the sacred bond, and now that fate is walking around alive and well and gathering followers, and it makes you look careful, Darius said softly. Revan stopped, swallowed, recalibrated. "It makes the crown look vulnerable," he amended, "and vulnerability invites challenge." Darius's hand flattened on the map, covering several of the red marks. "She's not a threat. Then what is she?" Darius didn't answer, because he didn't know anymore. All he knew was that every report that came in, every sighting, every story of Lyanna Viral walking into a dying town and bringing it back to life through nothing but competence and compassion, it all felt like a knife twisting deeper into the wound he'd thought would scar over. She wasn't supposed to survive this. The rejected mate bond should have broken her. That was how it worked in every story, every legend. The rejected party faded, withered, died of heartbreak or madness or the simple inability to exist with half their soul torn away. Instead, she was thriving, growing stronger, building something that looked dangerously close to power. And it was driving him out of his mind. "The council wants her brought in," Revan said carefully, watching Darius's face for reaction. "For questioning. They see her as a destabilizing element that needs to be contained before—" "No." The word came out flat, absolute. Revan's jaw tightened. "Sire, with respect." "I said no. Darius repeated, and this time there was an edge to it. A warning. She's not a criminal. She's not a rebel. She's a healer doing her work. The council doesn't get to imprison people for the crime of existing. They see it as more than that. They see it as... I don't care what they see, Darius cut him off. His voice was still quiet, but there was something feral underneath it now, something that made Revan take half a step back. She is under my protection. Anyone who moves against her answers to me. Personally. The word hung in the air like a blade. Revan stared at him for a long moment. Then very quietly, he said, "You rejected her, Your Majesty. I know what I did. Then why protect her now?" It was a fair question. A question Darius had been asking himself every night while the bond writhed in his chest like a living thing. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said finally, and hated how hollow it sounded. Revan didn't believe him. Darius could see it in his eyes, but the man was smart enough not to push. "As you say, sire," Revan said with a bow that was technically respectful but felt like mockery. "I'll inform the council of your decision. You do that." Revan left, and Darius was alone with the map and the red marks and the growing certainty that he'd made a terrible mistake. Not in rejecting her, in thinking he could reject her and still control what happened next. He poured himself a drink from the crystal decanter on the side table. Expensive whiskey that tasted like smoke and regret. Drank it in one swallow, poured another. The bond pulsed in his chest, insistent and accusing. And for the first time in 11 years of wearing the crown, King Darius Valor felt something he'd trained himself never to feel. Fear. Not of enemies or rebellion or the thousand threats that came with ruling an empire. Fear of what he'd done. Fear of what was coming. Fear of the woman with gray eyes who was out there somewhere, building a future he'd refused to be part of. And fear, most of all, that when everything finally fell apart, and it would fall apart, he could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. He'd have no one to blame but himself. But the breaking point came on a night when the moon was dark and the wind carried the smell of smoke and coming snow. Darius was in a meeting with the War Council, reviewing troop deployments for the northern border, when the doors burst open. A young soldier stumbled in, out of breath, armor askew, eyes wide with the kind of panic that came from seeing something that broke your understanding of how the world worked. "Sire," he gasped, nearly falling over his own feet. "The outer holdings, there's been an incident." Darius set down his pen with careful precision. What kind of incident? The soldier hesitated, and in that hesitation, Darius felt his entire world tilt. "It's the woman," the soldier said. "Lyanna Viral. She was in Greymarch, treating the sick. The council, Lord Heron's men, they..." The bond suddenly screamed. It was the only word for it. A surge of panic and pain and fear that hit Darius like a physical blow, strong enough that he actually staggered, had to catch himself on the edge of the table. What did they do? His voice came out wrong. Too rough, too raw. The wolf was close to the surface now, claws scraping against the inside of his skin. "They arrested her, sire." The soldier's words came out in a rush. "Took her to the Black Veil stronghold. Lord Heron said, he said she was inciting rebellion, that she was a threat to..." Darius stopped listening. The Black Veil was a fortress carved into the northern mountains, a place where political prisoners went to disappear, where inconvenient people became non-existent, where the empire buried its mistakes so deep they'd never see daylight again. The room erupted around him, voices overlapping, council members shouting questions and demands and accusations at each other. Darius heard none of it. The bond was a living thing now, thrashing in his chest. He could feel her fear, her pain. Not physical yet. They hadn't hurt her yet. But the anticipation of it. The knowledge of what places like the Black Veil did to people who had no power and no protection. And whose fault was that? Who had left her powerless? Who had stripped her of the one protection that would have made her untouchable? Lord Heron, seated at the far end of the table, cleared his throat. "It was a necessary action, Your Majesty. She was destabilizing the outer territories, gathering followers, spreading dissent." Darius moved. He was across the table before Heron could finish the sentence, before the man could even register that he'd made a fatal mistake. One hand fisted in the Lord's expensive collar, lifting him out of his chair and slamming him back against the stone wall hard enough to crack it. Heron's head bounced off the rock with a sound like ripe fruit splitting. "You touched her," Darius said, and his voice was no longer human. It was all wolf now, all fury and fang, and the kind of rage that didn't care about consequences. You put your hands on her. Heron's face went purple, then white. His hands scrabbled uselessly at Darius's wrist. Sire, I was acting in the kingdom's best interest. The kingdom's best interest, Darius repeated, his voice dropping to something worse than shouting, something cold and lethal. You presume to know the kingdom's best interest. You presume to move against someone under my protection. You presumed. The presumption was yours, actually, Heron choked out, and there was defiance in his eyes, even as he struggled for air. You're the one who rejected her. You're the one who left her exposed. I was simply... Darius slammed him against the wall again, and this time something cracked. He didn't know if it was the wall or Heron's ribs and didn't particularly care. Where? He growled. Exact location. How many guards? How long has she been there? Heron stammered out coordinates, security details, the layout of the stronghold, how many men he'd sent, what orders they'd been given. With each word, Darius felt something inside him break a little more. They had her in the lower cells, the ones reserved for the worst criminals, the ones where light didn't reach and hope went to die. He dropped Heron. The Lord hit the floor gasping like a landed fish. Darius turned to face the council. His eyes had gone completely black, fully shifted, claws out. The thin veneer of civilization he'd worn for 11 years was gone, burned away by the Bond screaming and his own complicity in this disaster. Anyone who moves against her again, he said quietly, and the quiet was more terrifying than any shout could have been, answers to me, personally. Not the crown, not the throne. Me. He didn't wait for a response, didn't wait for permission or planning or any of the careful preparation that usually went into royal action. He just walked out of the room, through the palace, past the guards who scrambled to follow, and couldn't keep up with a king who'd stopped caring about looking civilized. By the time he reached the stables, he was already half-shifted, claws out, fangs descended, eyes black as midnight. The Bond pulled him north like a rope around his ribs. And Darius, King Darius Valor, master of control, who had spent 11 years building an empire on the foundation of never letting anyone see him vulnerable, never needing anything, never being ruled by anything other than cold logic. Let go. Let the wolf out. Let himself become exactly what he'd been denying since the night he'd looked into gray eyes and chosen the crown over the woman who could have been his salvation. He became the thing that terrified kingdoms, the thing that didn't negotiate or compromise or think about consequences, the thing that had one purpose and one purpose only. Get her back, or burn the world trying. The Black Veil stronghold was carved into the side of a mountain, like a scar on the world's face, all iron and ice, and the kind of darkness that had nothing to do with the absence of light. Darius didn't send an army. He became one. The guards at the outer gate barely had time to register the blur of motion before he was through them. Not past them, through them. His claws found throats before their minds could process that the thing coming at them used to be a king and was now something else entirely. Something that had shed the pretense of civilization like a snake shedding dead skin. Blood sprayed hot across fresh snow. The first body hit the ground with a wet thump that should have meant something. Should have triggered some kind of hesitation or regret or the basic human response to ending a life. It didn't. Darius felt nothing except the pull of the Bond dragging him deeper into the fortress, a compass needle finding true north through stone and steel, and the bodies of men who'd made the mistake of standing between him and what he'd come for. More guards came pouring out of the barracks. They always did. Men in black armor with weapons designed to kill things bigger and meaner than humans. Crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts. Spears blessed by priests who thought prayers could stop claws. They died the same as everyone else. Fast. Messy. Forgotten the moment Darius moved past them toward the next obstacle. This is what people don't understand about power, he thought, as his claws tore through a man's chest plate like it was made of parchment instead of forged steel. Real power isn't sitting on a throne making proclamations. Real power isn't commanding armies or signing treaties or playing the Game of Thrones like it's chess and you're 10 moves ahead. Real power is knowing exactly how much damage you can do and choosing not to do it. Choosing restraint. Choosing civilization over savagery. Until the moment you stop choosing. He'd spent 11 years being the king who chose restraint, who used words instead of claws, who built empires through strategy instead of slaughter, who proved every day that he was more than just an animal with a crown. That king was gone now, left behind in a council chamber along with any illusion that duty mattered more than this. What remained was the thing underneath, the wolf, who'd been caged so long he'd forgotten what running free felt like. The primal core of him that didn't care about politics or appearances or the careful balance of power. The part of him that only cared about one thing, her. And he felt glorious. The fortress erupted into chaos around him. Alarms shrieked from every tower. Boots thundered on stone as soldiers scrambled to respond. Commanders shouted orders that no one followed because you can't follow orders when you're too busy dying or running or trying to figure out how a single man was cutting through trained soldiers like wheat before a scythe. Darius didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't give them time to organize or strategize or do any of the things that might have made this difficult. He just moved. Forward, always forward, following the bond like a rope around his ribs, pulling him down into the mountain's guts. Every instinct he'd buried under duty and protocol and the careful performance of kingship surged back with interest. This was what he was made for, not diplomacy, not sitting in council meetings pretending that words mattered more than teeth, not the endless dance of politics where everyone smiled and schemed and nobody ever said what they actually meant. This. Violence, clarity, purpose. The bond pulled him deeper, down stone corridors that reeked of mildew and despair and the particular stench of places where hope went to die. Past cells that held other prisoners, men and women whose crimes he didn't know and didn't care about. Their eyes tracked him as he passed, wide with terror or hope or both. He ignored them all. There was only one person in this fortress who mattered, only one life he'd come to save. The rest of them could rot or go free or burn for all he cared. A full squad of soldiers blocked the corridor ahead. 10 men in tight formation, shields locked, spears leveled in a bristling wall of steel. Professional, disciplined, trained to hold against charges from things bigger and stronger than any single wolf. Dead anyway. The lead soldier shouted something, a warning or a challenge or a prayer to whatever god soldiers prayed to when they knew they were about to die. Darius hit their line like a battering ram wrapped in claws and fury. The formation shattered. Shields crumpled under the impact. Spears snapped like kindling. Men screamed and then stopped screaming as claws found the gaps in their armor that no amount of training could protect. It took 8 seconds from first contact to last body hitting the floor. When it was over, Darius stood in the center of the carnage, breathing hard, covered head to toe in blood that wasn't his. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to break out. The wolf in him sang with satisfaction, with the rightness of this kind of direct action after years of political maneuvering. And beneath it all, the bond thrummed, urgent, insistent, close now. So close he could almost taste her fear on his tongue. He found her in the lowest level of the fortress, 3 floors below ground where the air was thin and cold and tasted like desperation. In a cell that shouldn't exist according to any official records. The kind of cell where political inconveniences went to be erased from history. The door was solid iron, 3 inches thick, locked with mechanisms designed to keep monsters contained. Runes crawled across its surface, pulsing with the kind of magic that cost fortunes and usually worked. Darius tore it off the hinges. The metal shrieked in protest. The stone frame cracked and crumbled. Ancient spells flared bright and died as the door ripped free and hit the opposite wall hard enough to leave a dent shaped like failure. And there she was. Liana sat against the far wall, wrists shackled above her head with chains bolted into stone that had been old when the Empire was young. Her gray dress was torn at the shoulder and hem. Dried blood crusted one side of her face from a cut above her eyebrow that should have been tended hours ago. Her lips were cracked from dehydration. Dark circles hollowed the space beneath her eyes. But those eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had haunted every waking moment and sleeping dream for 3 months, were still clear, still sharp, still absolutely, defiantly unbroken. She looked up as he filled the doorway, and something flickered across her face. Surprise that he'd actually come. Relief that she wasn't going to die in this hole. And then, horribly, something that looked like resignation, like she'd already calculated what this rescue would cost and found the price too high. "You came," she said, Her voice was hoarse from screaming or crying or just from having no water, but it was steady, controlled, even now, even here. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of breaking. Darius crossed the cell in 3 strides. His claws retracted as he moved, sliding back under human skin. His eyes faded from wolf black back to ordinary brown, the monster receding just enough to let the man speak. He reached for the chains. They were spelled iron, designed to suppress shifter strength, to drain energy, to make escape impossible, designed to be unbreakable by anything short of industrial equipment and a week of work. He ripped them from the wall like they were made of paper. The stone exploded. Ancient runes flared bright enough to blind and then died in showers of sparks. Liana's arms dropped suddenly, and she gasped at the shock of it, at blood rushing back into hands that had been raised too long, at freedom arriving so violently after hours of captivity. Darius caught her before she could fall forward. The moment his skin touched hers, the bond detonated. There was no other word for it. After 3 months of poisoned absence, of feeling it rot and fester and turn into something that hurt worse than any physical wound, the sudden contact hit like lightning striking dry wood, like coming home after a lifetime of exile. Like every metaphor for connection he'd ever dismissed as romantic nonsense turned out to be literal truth. His arms went around her automatically, pulled her close, felt her weight settle against him like she was made to fit there. She pushed weakly against his chest with hands that shook. "You shouldn't have come." He was still half-shifted, still covered in blood from throat to boots, still shaking with the aftermath of violence and the overwhelming presence of her after months of deliberate, agonizing distance. "Shut up," he growled. She looked up at him, and her expression was so tired, so done. Like she'd seen this movie before and knew exactly how it ended and was already bracing for the impact. "You chose the crown," she whispered. The words came out flat, factual. Not an accusation, just a statement of reality. And Darius, standing in a cell that smelled like suffering and old cruelty, holding the woman he'd rejected in front of his entire court, with the bodies of 30 men cooling in the corridors behind him, finally said the truth he'd been running from since the night of the convocation. "I chose wrong." The words cracked something open inside him, something he'd kept locked behind duty and fear, and the iron certainty that he knew better than fate. That his logic was superior to the bond, that choosing survival over surrender was the smart play. Wrong. All of it wrong. Liana's breath caught. Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for the lie, for the angle, for the inevitable betrayal that she'd learned to expect from people with power. She wouldn't find one. There wasn't one. This was just truth, raw and bleeding, and 3 months too late, but finally spoken. Outside the cell, the fortress was reorganizing. He could hear it, boots on stone, shouted commands, the distinctive sound of a proper response forming instead of the chaos he'd carved through on the way in. They'd regroup, send for reinforcements from other strongholds, trap him here if they were smart enough. "We need to move," he said quietly. He gathered her into his arms. She didn't protest, didn't have the strength to. She just let him lift her like she weighed nothing, her head falling against his chest, and he felt the exact moment her body recognized safety and started to shut down. The adrenaline that had kept her upright, kept her defiant, kept her conscious through whatever they'd done to her. It was draining away now, leaving exhaustion in its wake. "Not yet," he told her, his voice rough. "Stay with me a little longer. We're not safe yet." Her fingers curled weakly into his shirt, holding on with what little strength remained. "Why did you come?" The question was simple. The answer was complicated. "Because I'm an idiot," he said. "Because I've spent 3 months pretending I could live with what I did, and I can't. Because they took you, and that's not allowed. Because you're mine, and I'm yours, and I rejected that because I was scared, and you have no idea how much I regret it." He didn't say that last part out loud. Couldn't quite get the words past the knot in his throat, but she heard it anyway. He could see it in the way her eyes closed, in the small sound she made that might have been a sob or a laugh or both at once. "Your kingdom," she murmured. "They'll call this treason." "Probably. You'll lose everything." "Already lost everything that mattered," he said. 3 months ago. "Just took me this long to figure it out." Darius carried her out the way he'd come, through corridors lined with bodies in black armor, past cells full of prisoners who pressed against bars to watch their passage with expressions ranging from shock to vindication. Upstairs, carved from the mountain itself, worn smooth by centuries of condemned feet. The fortress had sealed the main exits while he was in the depths. Smart tactical thinking, useless against someone who'd stopped caring about property damage. Darius kicked through an exterior wall instead. Stone exploded outward in a shower of rubble and dust. Cold mountain air rushed in, sharp enough to hurt his lungs. He stepped through the hole he'd made onto a narrow ledge 50 feet above the snow line. Below, he could see light spreading out like a disease. Torches, campfires, an army gathering. They'd sent for reinforcements faster than he'd expected. Above, stars wheeled in a sky so clear and cold it looked like broken glass scattered across black velvet. Liana stirred in his arms, turned her head to look at the destruction spreading below them. "Your kingdom," she said again, and this time there was something broken in her voice. "Look what you're losing." "Can burn," he said flatly. "All of it. Every stone and treaty and carefully balanced alliance. Let it burn." She actually laughed at that, a small broken sound that hurt to hear. "They'll call this madness. They can call it whatever they want. You'll regret this when the reality hits, when you realize what you gave up for." "For you," he interrupted. "I gave it up for you. And the only thing I regret is that it took me 3 months and you getting thrown in a dungeon to pull my head out of my ass." Her hand rose to touch his face. Her fingers were cold, trembling. They traced the line of his jaw like she was trying to memorize the shape of him before this moment ended. "I have the lunar fracture," she said quietly. "You know that." "I know. There's no cure, no treatment, just slow deterioration until there's nothing left of who I am. I know that too." "Then why?" Her voice cracked. "Why come for me? Why throw everything away for someone who's going to forget your face in a few years? Who's going to look at you like a stranger? Who's going to—" "Because running didn't save me last time," Darius said. His voice was rough, hard, honest in a way he'd forgotten how to be. "I watched someone I loved fade, watched the lunar fracture eat her alive, and I told myself that walking away before it happened again was the smart choice, the logical choice. And I've spent 3 months dying inside," he said, "feeling the bond rot, feeling you out there building something real while I played king in my tower, and I realized that logic is just fear dressed up in smart clothes." Liana's breath shuddered out. "This is insane." "Probably. You'll lose everything." "I keep telling you," he said. "I already lost everything that mattered. This is just me figuring out how to get it back." He shifted his grip on her, preparing to climb down from the ledge, when Liana went completely rigid in his arms. Every muscle tensed, her eyes went wide. "Darius," she breathed. "Look." He turned his head to follow her gaze. In the distance, toward the capital, the sky glowed wrong, orange instead of the deep blue of night. Multiple sources. Spreading, fire. His blood went cold. "What is that?" But even as he asked, he knew it in his bones. Liana's face had gone white as the snow around them. "The council," she whispered. "They knew you'd come for me. They knew you couldn't help yourself. While you were here, they—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Understanding hit Darius like a warhammer to the chest, driving the air from his lungs. This hadn't been a capture. This had been a trap, bait, a way to get the unstable, unpredictable king away from the capital while they made their move. While he'd been carving through soldiers to rescue his queen, his empire had begun to fall. Not through external invasion, not through the kind of war he could fight with armies and strategy, through internal coup. The council finally deciding that a king who rejected his mate, who acted erratically, who'd started protecting the very woman he'd publicly spurned, that king was too unstable to rule. They were taking the throne, and those fires burning in the distance, those were them purging anyone loyal to him, burning out the nobles who'd stood by him, the military commanders who'd served him, anyone who might resist the new order. His supporters were dying while he stood on a mountain holding the woman who'd cost him everything. Darius stared at the distant flames and felt something fundamental shift inside him. A calculation he'd been making unconsciously for 11 years, since the day he'd taken the crown and sworn to protect the empire above all else, suddenly resolving into absolute clarity. The empire or the woman, the crown or her, power or love. He'd made this choice once before, 3 months ago. Chosen the crown, chosen duty, chosen what he thought was right, and it had nearly destroyed him. They're burning the city, Lyanna said quietly. Everyone loyal to you. If you don't go back now, if you don't stop this, I'm not going back. The words came out certain, final, no hesitation. Lyanna stared at him like he'd started speaking a language she didn't understand. What? I'm not going back, he repeated, each word deliberate. Let them have the throne. Let them have the capital. Let them have the whole damn empire. It was never mine anyway. Just borrowed. Just a role I played. You don't mean that. Her voice was shaking now. You've spent your entire life building that kingdom. Everything you've done, every sacrifice, was for nothing, he interrupted. Or worse than nothing. Because I built an empire and forgot how to be human, forgot that some things matter more than power. Darius, the bond isn't making me say this, he cut her off. His voice was steady, calm, more certain than he'd been about anything since the night he'd rejected her. I'm not in shock. I'm not delusional. I'm just finally seeing clearly. They'll kill your supporters, Lyanna said desperately. Everyone who stood by you, they're dying right now while I choose you, Darius finished. Yes, and I'll have to live with that, but I can't go back there and save them without losing you, and I'm done making that trade. This is madness. It's a choice, he corrected. Maybe the first real choice I've made since I took the crown. Everything else was just reaction, playing the role, doing what was expected. This is me deciding what actually matters, Lyanna's eyes filled with tears that spilled over. You're going to regret this. Maybe, he acknowledged, when the dust settles and I see the full cost, when I have to face what I let burn. But I won't regret choosing you. That's the one thing I know for certain. How can you be so sure? Because I already tried the alternative, Darius said simply. Spent 3 months living with the consequences of choosing the crown over you. And it nearly killed me. So yeah, this might be madness. Might be the worst decision I've ever made. But at least it's honest. The fires in the distance spread. Orange light crawling across the horizon like a disease. His empire eating itself while he stood watching. It should have hurt more. Should have felt like amputation. Like watching everything he'd built turn to ash and feeling each loss like a blade. Instead, it felt like relief. Like a weight he'd been carrying for 11 years suddenly lifted from his shoulders. Like maybe, for the first time since he'd taken the obsidian throne, he was making a choice that wasn't about fear. We need to move, Lyanna said finally. Her voice was stronger now. Less shock. More acceptance. If they trapped you here, they'll send reinforcements. We can't stay. Darius nodded. Where do we go? She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, there are people. The ones I've been helping over the past 3 months. Villages, communities. They'll hide us. You sure about that? She smiled, and it was small, but real. I built something too, remember? Something without thrones or power or armies. Just people who trust each other. It's fragile. Vulnerable. But it's real. Trust, Darius repeated. The word felt foreign. He'd spent so long relying on control instead, on knowing every angle, on never being vulnerable enough to need trust. It's harder than ruling, Lyanna warned. Good, he said. I'm tired of easy. He climbed down from the ledge with Lyanna in his arms. His muscles burned. His wounds, he had more than he'd realized, shallow cuts and deep bruises from the fighting, started to ache as the adrenaline finally faded. Didn't matter. None of it mattered except getting her somewhere safe. Behind them, the Black Veil fortress erupted into full alert. Bells rang from every tower. Horns sounded. Torches lit along the walls like stars falling upward. Ahead, the forest waited, dark, dense, full of unknowns and the promise of obscurity. Darius stepped into the trees without looking back at the fortress, or the distant fires, or anything that represented what he used to be. The snow crunched under his boots, his breath fogged in the cold air. Lyanna's weight in his arms was solid, real. The bond hummed contentedly for the first time in 3 months, like a broken bone finally set properly and allowed to heal. You're going to regret this, Lyanna murmured against his chest. You keep saying that, because it keeps being true. Then I'll deal with it when it comes, Darius said. But I won't regret you. Never you. She was quiet for a while. They moved through the forest, following game trails barely visible under the snow. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit faded behind them. Either the guards had lost their trail or were too smart to chase a shifted alpha into unfamiliar territory at night. Eventually, Liana said, "I'll forget you. The lunar fracture, it takes everything, your name, your face, what you meant to me. All of it." "I know. Then why go through this? Why choose someone who won't even remember choosing you?" "Because you'll forget," Darius said quietly. "But I won't. And maybe that's enough. Maybe loving someone means being willing to remember for both of you when they can't anymore. That's not fair to you." "Fair stopped mattering 3 months ago," he said. "Around the time I rejected my mate in front of the entire court because I was scared. I don't get to complain about fair." Liana pulled back enough to look at his face. Even in the darkness, even exhausted and hurt, her eyes were clear. "You really mean this?" "Every word. You chose the crown once." "I did," Darius acknowledged, "and I've regretted it every single day since. I'm not making that mistake twice." In the distance, barely visible through the trees, more fires bloomed against the night sky. The orange glow spread like infection, his kingdom tearing itself apart, and he was walking away from it. It should have destroyed him to watch, should have felt like losing everything that defined who he was. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he'd done in years. Ahead, through the trees, Liana pointed to lights. A small village, smoke rising from chimneys. The ordinary signs of ordinary lives. "There," she said. "They'll help us." They moved toward the lights, and Darius felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, not yet. Maybe not ever, but purpose. Clear and undeniable. He'd been a king for 11 years, built an empire, commanded armies, shaped the world to his will. And he'd been miserable, empty, playing a role that required him to cut away every part of himself that made him human. Now, walking toward a village of people he'd never rule, carrying a woman who'd never be his queen by any official measure, having abandoned everything he'd ever worked for, he felt more alive than he'd felt in a decade. Because this was choice, real choice. Not the illusion of control, but the actual decision to value something more than survival or power or duty. The village gate opened. An older woman stood there, weathered and sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that had seen everything twice and been surprised by nothing. She looked at Liana, then at Darius, then at the blood covering him from collar to boots. "She's hurt," the woman said. Not a question. Darius nodded. The woman stepped aside without hesitation. "Bring her, quick now, before they catch your scent." They entered the village, and doors opened around them. People emerged, looked at Darius with recognition and suspicion. He'd been their king hours ago, was probably their enemy now. But they looked at Liana with something else. Respect, affection, the kind of regard that couldn't be commanded or bought, only earned, the thing she'd built while he'd been building empires. A room was prepared with efficiency that spoke of practice, clean blankets, hot water, medical supplies. The village healer, an old man with steady hands and intelligent eyes, examined Liana's wounds and gave Darius a look that said he'd seen worse, but not by much. "She'll live," the healer said after a long moment, "but she needs rest. Real rest, not running through forests in the middle of the night." "How long?" Darius asked. "Weeks, if you're lucky." The healer's eyes were sharp. "You planning to stay that long? Or are you just passing through on your way to wherever disgraced kings go?" Darius looked at Liana, at her exhausted face and defiant eyes, at the woman who'd survived 3 months of his rejection and hours of captivity and still had the strength to look at him without hatred. "As long as it takes," he said. The healer grunted. "Good. She's earned that much, more than earned it." He left. The room emptied. It was just Darius and Liana and the weight of everything that had happened. "You should clean up," Liana said quietly from the bed. "You look like you bathed in blood." "Essentially did. That's disgusting. That's honest." She smiled despite the exhaustion. "There's water. Clothes in the chest. They won't fit, but they're clean." Darius crossed to the basin, started washing blood from his hands and arms. The water turned red immediately, then darker. He'd killed so many people tonight. 30, at least. Maybe more. Stopped counting after the first dozen. He should feel something about that. Guilt, remorse, horror at how easily the violence had come. He felt nothing except relief that she was safe. What does that make me? He wondered, scrubbing at blood that had dried in the creases of his palms. What kind of man kills without regret? The kind who's been king too long, he decided. The kind who's forgotten that some things are worth more than strategy or mercy, or playing by rules that only apply when you're not desperate. Liana watched him from the bed, fighting sleep. You can rest, he told her. I'm not going anywhere. Promise? Promise. Her eyes closed. Her breathing evened out. The tension drained from her shoulders as sleep finally claimed her. Darius finished cleaning up, changed into clothes that were too small and smelled like wood smoke and honest work instead of the perfumes and fine fabrics of the palace. Sat in a chair beside her bed because standing felt like too much distance. Outside, the village settled into night. Somewhere in the distance, his former empire burned. His council plotted his replacement. His enemies celebrated. His supporters died or fled or bent the knee to new masters. And Darius Valor, former king, rejected by fate, and rejecting fate in turn, covered in the blood of men he'd killed without hesitation, sat in a small room in a small village and felt something he hadn't felt in 11 years of wearing the crown. Not happiness. That would come later maybe. Or maybe never. But certainty. The bone-deep knowledge that he'd finally made the right choice, even if it cost him everything he'd spent his life building. The bond hummed contentedly in his chest. Liana slept, her breathing steady and peaceful for the first time in months. And in the darkness, while his empire collapsed and his future became uncertain and everything he'd built turned to ash, Darius finally understood what power actually meant. Not control, not dominance, not the ability to bend the world to your will through force or cunning or the weight of a crown, but the strength to choose what mattered and hold on to it, even when, especially when, the world demanded you let go. He reached out and took Liana's hand. Her fingers curled around his automatically, instinctive even in sleep. And Darius made a promise. To himself. To her. To whatever fate or force had brought them together and watched him reject it out of fear. He wouldn't run again. Wouldn't choose safety over truth. Wouldn't let fear or logic or the seductive whisper of duty make his decisions. Whatever came next, disease or war, or the slow erosion of everything they were, they'd face it together, not as king and queen, just as two people who'd chosen each other when the world said they shouldn't. That would have to be enough. It would be enough. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, covering the blood-soaked ground and the tracks leading away from the black veil, and the evidence of what had happened tonight. And in the wreckage of everything he'd been, Darius Valor closed his eyes and started to figure out who he could become. Dawn came cold and unforgiving. Darius woke to the sound of boots on frozen ground. Too many boots, moving with purpose, surrounding the village in a pattern that spoke of military precision and hostile intent. He was on his feet before his eyes fully opened, instinct overriding exhaustion. The chair clattered backward. His hand went to his hip where a sword should have been, but wasn't, because he'd left the palace with nothing but fury and desperation. Liana stirred in the bed, still weak but aware enough to hear what he heard. Her eyes found his in the gray pre-dawn light. "They found us," she said quietly. Not a question. Darius moved to the window, pulled back the rough cloth curtain just enough to see without being seen. The village was surrounded, at least 50 soldiers in formation, not the black armor of the Black Veil. These wore the crimson and gold of the royal guard. His royal guard. The men who'd sworn oaths to protect him. Except they weren't here to protect him. They were here to bring him in. At the center of the formation, mounted on a black destrier that cost more than most men earned in a lifetime, sat Lord Revan, head of the council. The man Darius had trusted to manage the Empire's day-to-day operations. The careful man. The predictable man. The man who'd apparently decided that a king who abandoned his throne was no longer worth serving. Revan's voice carried across the village square, amplified by magic or just the particular acoustics of mountain valleys. "Darius Valor," he called out, "former king of Dravarin, you are hereby summoned to answer charges of dereliction of duty, abandonment of the crown, and treason against the state. Surrender yourself and the woman. This doesn't have to end in bloodshed. Former king." They'd already stripped his title, probably within hours of him leaving the capital. The council moving with the efficiency of men who'd been planning this for longer than Darius wanted to think about. The village around them was waking up, doors opening, people emerging into the cold morning air to see what was happening, to see if they'd made a terrible mistake by sheltering a fugitive. Darius could see it in their faces. The calculation, the fear. These were people who'd survived by staying beneath the notice of power, by not making waves. And now power had come to their doorstep with swords drawn and demands ready. This is what happens when you build an empire on fear instead of loyalty, Darius thought bitterly. The second you stop being useful, the second you show weakness, everyone who smiled and bowed and called you majesty starts calculating the cost of staying on your side. He'd known this, had always known it on some level, but knowing something intellectually and feeling it in your bones were different things. The village elder, the weathered woman from last night, stood in the square facing Revan's horse. Her spine was straight, but her hands were shaking. "We're just simple folk," she said. "We don't want trouble with the crown." "Then don't make trouble," Revan replied. His voice was reasonable, almost kind, the voice of a man trying to avoid unnecessary violence. "Hand over the fugitives and we'll leave you in peace. Resist and you'll be charged as accomplices." Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Darius watched the elder's face, watched the calculation happen, watched her look at the soldiers and then at the village behind her and then back at the soldiers. Watched her choose survival. It wasn't even a hard choice. Not really. What was she supposed to do? Sacrifice her entire village for strangers who'd shown up bleeding in the middle of the night? She turned toward the house where Darius stood watching. Her eyes found the window, found him. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. Then louder, to Revan, "They're in the healer's house, northeast corner. Smart woman, practical woman. Woman who understood that principles were luxuries the powerless couldn't afford." Darius didn't blame her. Couldn't blame her. She was doing what people did when confronted with forces they couldn't fight. She was surviving, but it still felt like a blade between the ribs. Liana was out of bed now, swaying but standing. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. "We need to run." "Where?" Darius asked. "The village is surrounded. They've got us boxed in. Running just means dying tired. Then we fight. You can barely stand. I don't have a weapon. There are 50 trained soldiers out there. So we surrender?" The word hung in the air between them like poison. Surrender. Give up. Except that this particular story ended here, in a small village, surrounded by men who used to call him king and now called him fugitive. Everything in Darius rebelled against the idea. He'd never surrendered in his life, never given up, never stopped fighting even when the odds were impossible. But fighting meant people died. Villagers who'd done nothing except show kindness to someone who needed it. Liana, who was still recovering. Maybe even him, though that particular outcome didn't bother him as much. The door burst open. Soldiers poured in, 6 of them, swords drawn but not raised, professional, controlled. They fanned out to cover the room, blocking exits, establishing dominance through position rather than violence. The last one through the door was Captain Aldrich. Darius knew him, had promoted him personally 3 years ago. Good soldier, better tactician, loyal, or so he'd thought. Aldrich's face was carefully neutral. "Sire," he said, and at least he had the decency to use the title even if Revan had stripped it away. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder than it needs to be?" Darius repeated slowly. "You're surrounding a village, threatening civilians, coming for me with an armed company like I'm a rabid dog instead of the man who made your career." "You abandoned the throne," Aldrich said. His voice was flat, factual. "Left the capital in chaos. People are dying because you walked away." "People are dying because the council staged a coup," Darius shot back. "The council is restoring order," Aldrich corrected. "You created the disorder by rejecting your mate bond and then violently rescuing her, by killing 30 men in the Black Veil, by choosing personal desire over duty." Every word landed like a hammer, precise, accurate, devastating, because it was all true. Darius had done all of those things, had made all of those choices. And now he was standing in a room surrounded by soldiers facing the consequences. This is what power actually looks like when you lose it, he thought. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just men with swords asking you politely to come quietly while making it clear that quiet or loud, you're coming either way. "Stand down," Aldrich said. "Both of you. You'll be taken back to the capital for trial. The council wants this handled legally." The council wants me executed legally, Darius corrected. There's a difference. That's not my concern, Aldrich said. My concern is bringing you in with minimal casualties. Don't make me add this village to the list of things burning because of your choices. The threat was clear. Resist, and people died. Villagers. Maybe Liana. Definitely soldiers who were just following orders from the new authority. Darius looked at Liana, at her exhausted face and defiant eyes, at the woman he'd burned his entire life down to save. If he surrendered, they'd both end up in cells, probably executed within a week. Quick trial. Guilty verdict predetermined. Justice performed for the masses. If he fought, people died, and they still ended up captured or dead. No good options. Just bad choices and worse ones. The math of survival when you'd stopped being the one with power. I'll go, Darius said quietly. But she stays. She's not part of this. That's not how this works, Aldrich said. She's a civilian. A healer. She didn't ask to be dragged into this. She's your mate. Rejected or not, the bond makes her complicit. Complicit in what? Being kidnapped by Lord Heron? Being thrown in a cell? Complicit in destabilizing the Empire, Aldrich said, and his voice was harder now. She's been moving through the territories for months, building support, organizing the outcasts. That's rebellion, sire. That's treason. Whether you planned it together or she did it alone, the result is the same. Darius stared at him, at this man he'd trusted, this soldier he'd elevated, and realized that Aldrich believed what he was saying. Genuinely believed that Liana was a threat, that her work helping the forgotten populations of the Empire was somehow an attack on stability. That's what happens when you build a system that equates helping people with threatening power, Darius thought. Everyone who shows compassion becomes an enemy. He'd built that system, maintained it, defended it for 11 years, and now it was eating him alive. We're both going, Liana said before Darius could respond. Her voice was steady despite her exhaustion. If you're taking him, you're taking me. I won't let him face this alone. Noble, Aldrich said. Stupid, but noble. Fine. Both of you. Hands where I can see them. We're walking out of here nice and calm. The soldiers moved in. Practiced. Efficient. Hands on arms. Not rough, but firm. Establishing physical control without making it feel like violence. They were walked out of the house into the cold morning air. The entire village had gathered to watch. Faces lined the square. Old and young. Scared and resigned. The elder wouldn't meet Darius's eyes. Neither would most of them. They just watched in silence as their former king was marched through their streets like a common criminal. Only one person stepped forward. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, clutching a wooden sword that was probably his most prized possession. You're supposed to be strong, the boy said. His voice was high, accusing. Kings don't get captured. His mother yanked him back, hissed at him to be quiet. But the damage was done. Out of the mouths of children came the truth everyone else was too polite to say. You're supposed to be strong. And Darius wasn't. Not anymore. He was just a man who'd made choices and was now living with them. They were brought to the center of the square where Revan waited on his horse. Up close, the man looked tired. Older than Darius remembered. Lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. Darius, Revan said quietly, almost sadly. It didn't have to end this way. You staged a coup, Darius said. His voice was flat. How exactly did you expect it to end? We restored order after you abandoned it, Revan corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Revan's jaw tightened. You rejected your mate, destabilized the line of succession, started acting erratically, protecting her 1 minute, ignoring her the next. Then you slaughtered 30 men and walked away from the throne. What were we supposed to do? Trust that I knew what I was doing. You didn't know what you were doing, Revan said. You were compromised. The bond was poisoning you, making you unstable. We saw it happening, and we had to act. For the good of the Empire, Darius said bitterly. Yes, Revan said simply. For the good of the Empire. Someone had to put the kingdom first since you wouldn't. I put the kingdom first for 11 years, Darius shot back. Every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of my life was about that throne. And the second I chose something for myself, you called it treason. You chose her over the Empire, Revan said. That is treason. By definition, No, Darius said quietly. I chose to be human over being a symbol. There's a difference. Revan studied him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. You really believe that, don't you? That this was about freedom, about choosing love. You've convinced yourself you're the hero of this story. I'm not the hero of anything, Darius said. I'm just a man who made a mistake and tried to fix it. Your mistake was rejecting her, Revan said. Your second mistake was trying to undo the first. You should have stayed rejected, should have let her fade into obscurity, should have focused on being the king we needed instead of the man you wanted to be. And if I couldn't do that, then you should have abdicated properly, Revan said. Transferred power in an orderly fashion, not abandoned the throne in the middle of a crisis to play hero for a woman who was always going to die anyway. The words hit like a physical blow. Lyanna flinched. Darius felt rage surge up his spine like wildfire. Careful, he growled. It's true, Revan said. His voice was matter-of-fact. Clinical. She has the lunar fracture. She'll be dead in a few years no matter what you do. So you burn down an empire for what? A few months of happiness before she forgets your name? That's not love, Darius. That's selfishness. And what would you call what you're doing? Darius demanded. Seizing power while I was distracted? Burning out my supporters? Threatening villages? Necessity, Revan said simply. The hard choices you refused to make. Someone had to. This is what power does to people, Darius realized. It gives them the ability to justify anything, to call cruelty necessity, to call betrayal duty, to look someone in the eye and tell them their love was selfishness while staging a coup and calling it restoration. He'd done the same thing. For 11 years, made hard choices and called them necessary, sacrificed people and called it statecraft. The only difference was that now he was on the receiving end. What happens now? Lyanna asked. Her voice was steady, but Darius could feel her trembling beside him. Now we take you back to the capital, Revan said. You'll both stand trial. The charges are serious, but the evidence is clear. It should be quick. Quick meaning we'll be dead by next week, Darius said. Revan didn't deny it. The Empire needs closure, needs to see that no one is above the law, not even former kings. Especially not former kings, Darius corrected bitterly. Movement at the edge of his vision. One of the villagers stepping forward, a man in his 30s with scars on his hands from hard labor. He wasn't one of the ones who'd met them last night. Hadn't been in the room when Lyanna was treated. Just another face in the crowd. But something about the way he moved made Darius's instincts scream. The man's hand came up from his side. Metal flashed in the dawn light. Not a sword. Something smaller, harder to see. A crossbow pistol. Compact. Deadly at close range. The bolt fired with a sound like a branch snapping. Darius moved on pure instinct, threw himself sideways, got his body between the bolt and Lyanna. Pain exploded in his shoulder as the bolt punched through muscle and bone and came out the other side. He hit the ground hard, heard Lyanna scream, heard soldiers shouting, heard the distinctive sound of a man being tackled and disarmed. The world tilted, spun, refused to settle. Darius pushed himself up on his good arm. Blood poured from the wound in his shoulder. The bolt had gone clean through, silver-tipped, if the burning sensation was any indication. Designed to slow healing, to make the wound count. The assassin was on the ground now, soldiers holding him down. But he was laughing, actually laughing. For the true king, the man shouted. For Darius Valor, death to the usurpers. The words didn't make sense. Darius stared at him, at this stranger claiming to kill in his name. One of yours, apparently, Revan said coldly. He'd dismounted. Was standing over Darius with an expression caught between concern and calculation. Your supporters aren't all dead yet. Some still think you're worth dying for. I never asked for this, Darius gasped. The pain was getting worse. Silver poisoning spreading through his system. You never had to ask, Revan said. You were king. People followed you, loved you, would kill for you. And now that you've abandoned them, they're desperate, dangerous. He knelt down beside Darius. His voice dropped to a whisper that only Darius could hear. This is why you can't come back, he said quietly, almost gently. Your very existence creates instability. People will rally to you, will fight in your name, will tear the empire apart trying to restore you. So you're going to kill me to prevent civil war, Darius said through gritted teeth. I'm going to execute you legally to prevent civil war, Revan corrected. There's a difference. One is murder, the other is justice. He stood, raised his voice so everyone could hear. Get him medical attention, he ordered. I want him alive for trial. The woman, too. No more incidents. Soldiers moved in. Rough hands lifted Darius from the ground. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. He bit back a scream. Lyanna was beside him, her hands on his face, her eyes wide with fear. Stay with me, she whispered. Please, stay with me. Not planning on going anywhere, he managed. But even as he said it, he could feel the silver working through his system, slowing his healing, dragging him down toward darkness. The last thing he saw before consciousness faded was Revan's face. Tired, sad, absolutely certain that what he was doing was right. That's the thing about power, Darius thought as the world went black. Everyone who has it thinks they're the hero, thinks their cruelty is necessity, thinks their betrayal is duty. Even me, especially me. And then there was nothing. When Darius woke up, he was in a cage, not a cell. A cage. Iron bars on all sides, barely large enough to sit up in, designed to display him like an animal. They'd put him in the center of the capital's main square. Thousands of people crowded around, watching, jeering, throwing things. He was shirtless. His shoulder was bandaged, but still throbbing. The silver bolt had been removed, but the damage remained. His healing was working, but slowly, painfully. A sign hung above this cage, written in letters large enough to read from across the square. Darius Valor, traitor to the crown, murderer, tyrant, tyrant. They were calling him a tyrant. Him. The man who'd spent 11 years building infrastructure and trade routes and trying to make the empire work for everyone. But that's how it always went, wasn't it? The moment you fell, everything you'd built got rewritten. Every achievement became evidence of ambition. Every hard choice became proof of cruelty. History was written by whoever held the throne when the ink dried. Lyanna was in a cage beside his. Smaller. She was conscious. Watching him with eyes full of pain and fury and something that might have been regret. This is my fault, she mouthed. He shook his head, tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Too raw from screaming at some point he didn't remember. A platform had been erected in front of the cages. On it stood the council. All 12 of them, Revan at the center. The trial had already happened, Darius realized, while he was unconscious. They'd held it without him, convicted him in absentia. This wasn't about justice. This was about spectacle, about showing the people that even kings could fall. Revan stepped forward, raised his hands for silence. The crowd quieted. Citizens of Dravarin, he called out. His voice carried across the square. You've witnessed the evidence, heard the testimonies. The verdict is clear. Darius Valor is guilty of abandoning his throne, of murder, of treason against the state. Cheers from some sections of the crowd, silence from others. A few scattered shouts of protest that were quickly drowned out. The sentence is death, Revan continued, to be carried out at sunset today. Let this serve as a reminder that no one is above the law, not even kings. More cheers, louder now, the crowd feeding off itself, working itself into a frenzy. Darius watched it happen with a strange detachment. This was his empire. These were his people. And they were celebrating his execution. Not because they hated him. Not really. But because they'd been told to. Because the story had changed and they were adapting to the new narrative. That's what people did. They survived. They followed whoever held power. They convinced themselves that today's truth was the only truth that had ever mattered. He'd known this, had always known it. But knowing something and experiencing it were different things. Movement to his left. A soldier approaching Lyanna's cage, opening it, dragging her out. She fought, clawed at him, screamed Darius's name. What are you doing? Darius roared, his voice cracked. The crowd loves this, he realized. They're eating it up. Revan's eyes met his. Cold, calculated. She's not being executed, he said. Her crimes are different. She'll be exiled, sent to the border territories, forbidden from ever returning. You're separating us, Darius said. His hands gripped the bars of his cage hard enough that his knuckles went white. I'm being merciful, Revan said. She didn't choose this. You dragged her into it. She deserves a chance to live whatever life the lunar fracture leaves her. Mercy, Darius repeated. His laugh was bitter, ugly. You're sending her away so I die alone, so my last moments are spent knowing I couldn't protect her. That's not mercy. That's cruelty. Call it what you want, Revan said. The decision is made. Lyanna was being dragged toward a wagon at the edge of the square. She was still fighting, still screaming. Darius, she cried. Darius, please. Their eyes met across the distance, and in that moment, Darius saw his entire future collapse into a single point of absolute clarity. He was going to die here, in a cage, in front of a crowd that used to call him king, while the woman he'd burned everything to save was dragged away to die slowly of a disease he couldn't fight. This was the cost of his choices, the price of rejecting her and then trying to undo it, the consequences of being human in a world that demanded he be a symbol. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that Revan was right. His existence did create instability, did inspire people to fight, did threaten to tear the Empire apart. Sometimes the only way to save something was to remove yourself from it. The wagon pulled away. Lyanna's screams faded into the distance. Darius sagged against the bars of his cage. The fight went out of him all at once. He'd tried. Had really tried. Had chosen love over duty and burned down an empire and killed anyone who stood between him and her. And in the end, it hadn't mattered. Power had won. Like it always did. The sun crawled across the sky toward sunset, toward his execution. And Darius Valor closed his eyes and waited for the end. But the end didn't come. Instead, right as the sun touched the horizon, right as the executioner stepped onto the platform with his axe, the crowd exploded into chaos. Screams. Not celebration. Terror. Darius's eyes snapped open. Fire bloomed across the square. Not random. Targeted. The council's platform erupting into flames. And through the smoke and panic, figures moved. Dozens of them. Hundreds. People in ragged clothes with weapons that looked homemade and eyes that burned with purpose. The outcasts, the forgotten, the ones Lyanna had been helping, they'd come for him. Not because he was a king, but because he'd chosen her, because he'd shown them that even someone with power could choose people over position. And now they were choosing him. The cage door ripped open, hands pulled him out, faces he didn't recognize surrounded him. "Run!" someone shouted. "We'll hold them here." "Run!" And Darius, exhausted, wounded, watching everything he'd ever been burn around him, had to make one final choice: die here with dignity, or run and become something he'd never been. A survivor without power, a man without a crown. He ran. Darius ran through burning streets with blood in his mouth and revolution at his heels. The capital was eating itself alive. Fires bloomed on every corner like savage flowers. The organized rebellion that had freed him from the cage had dissolved into pure chaos the moment the first torch hit the first building. Now it was just violence, raw, indiscriminate. The kind of destruction that happened when people who'd been stepped on for too long finally got their hands on matches and realized that burning felt better than bleeding. He didn't stop running. Couldn't stop. Behind him he could hear soldiers shouting, boots hammering on cobblestone, the distinctive whine of crossbows being wound and fired. A bolt whistled past his ear close enough that he felt the wind of its passage, close enough to smell the iron of the tip. His shoulder screamed with every movement. The silver poisoning was still working through his system like acid in his veins, slowing him down, making his vision blur and swim at the edges, making his legs feel like they were made of wet sand instead of muscle and bone. But pain was just information, and right now the information said, keep moving or die bleeding in a gutter. While the woman you burned everything for gets dragged away to exile. A hand grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise, pulled him sideways into an alley. He spun on instinct, claws out, ready to fight, ready to kill anyone who stood between him and what he'd come for. "Easy," a voice said, sharp, female, commanding. "We're on your side." The speaker was a woman, maybe 40, hard to tell with the kind of life that aged you in ways calendars couldn't measure. Scar running down the left side of her face from temple to jaw, the kind that spoke of a blade that had been meant to kill and hadn't quite managed. Dressed in clothes that had been patched so many times they were more patched than original fabric. She held a rusted sword like she'd been born with it in her hand. Behind her stood a dozen others. Men and women, young and old, scarred, and whole. The forgotten people of Druvarin, the ones who existed in the margins while the Empire focused on glory and expansion and the endless accumulation of power, the ones Lyanna had been helping. "You're the ones who broke me out," Darius said. His breath came in ragged gasps that tasted like smoke and copper. "We're the ones she told us about," the woman corrected. Her eyes were hard. "Assessing. Said you chose her over power. Said that mattered. Said it meant something that even a king could be human. We figured anyone crazy enough to burn down an empire for love deserved a chance to finish the job." "I'm not trying to burn down the empire," Darius said. "Too late," the woman replied with a grim smile that had no humor in it. "It's already burning. We just gave it the push it needed. Been wanting to push for years. You just gave us the excuse." She wasn't wrong. Through the mouth of the alley, Darius could see the main square. The platform where the council had stood was a pile of flaming wreckage. Bodies littered the ground like discarded dolls, some in council robes, some in the ragged clothes of rebels. Most just civilians who'd been in the wrong place when violence decided to visit and didn't care about sides or innocence. This is what happens when you build a system on inequality, Darius thought as he watched smoke rise into the darkening sky. Eventually, the pressure becomes too much, and everything explodes. You can't keep people desperate forever, can't step on them indefinitely. Sooner or later, they decide that burning it all down is preferable to living under the boot, preferable to dying slowly of starvation or disease or the casual cruelty of empire. He'd known this intellectually, had read about it in history books written by people who'd watched other empires fall, had even warned the council about it in meetings they'd ignored because the desperate don't revolt, they just die quietly where you can't see them. But knowing something and watching it happen in real time were different experiences entirely. Different in the way that hearing about fire was different from feeling your skin blister. "Where's the woman?" he demanded. His voice came out rougher than intended. "Lyanna." They took her, put her in a wagon heading for the border territories. "Still heading that way last we heard," the scarred woman said. Her eyes flicked to the chaos behind them, to the soldiers hunting through smoke. "But the roads are blocked now, fighting everywhere, barricades, bodies. They might have turned back. Might be stuck somewhere between here and there. Might be dead. Then I need to find her." "You need to survive the next hour," the woman corrected. Her voice was flat. "Practical. The council sent the full garrison after you. 500 soldiers. Professional, trained, armed. They want you dead before this rebellion spreads any further. Before people start thinking that kings can fall and empires can burn. 500 soldiers. Professional killers. Well-armed, well-trained, hunting one wounded former king with a stolen knife in desperation. The math wasn't good. The math was catastrophic. But the math hadn't been good since the night he'd rejected Lyanna in front of the court. Since when had he started making decisions based on math instead of what mattered? Math said reject her and protect the throne. Math said choose duty over desire. Math had gotten him nothing but 3 months of agony and a cage in the public square. "I need weapons," he said. "Armor if you have it. And information." Where would they have taken her if the roads were blocked? The woman studied him for a long moment, eyes narrowing, calculating. Then she nodded sharp and decisive. "Come on, we've got a safe house 3 blocks from here. Armory's not much, but it's better than bare hands and hope." They moved through the burning city like ghosts, sticking to alleys, avoiding main streets where soldiers hunted in packs. Twice they had to freeze in shadows while patrols passed within feet of their position. Once they had to sprint when a building collapsed ahead of them and sent debris raining down like stone hail. The safe house was a basement beneath what used to be a textile mill. Cramped, dark, smelling of mold and desperate hope, and the particular stench of places where people hid from power. But it was defensible and it had weapons. Not good weapons. Rusted swords that had seen better decades. Bent spears that looked like they'd snap on first impact. A few crossbows that looked like they might explode if you tried to fire them. But weapons, nonetheless. Better than nothing. Better than teeth and claws alone. Darius armed himself with a long knife that had more nicks than edge, and a short sword that was heavier than ideal, but balanced well enough that he could work with it. Someone found him a leather vest that didn't fit right, but would stop a glancing blow. Maybe. If he was lucky. If the blade wasn't too sharp or the thrust too committed. While he geared up, the scarred woman spread a map on a wooden crate. the capital and surrounding territories, marked with notes in a dozen different hands, some in ink, some in what looked like dried blood. If they were heading for the border and got stopped, she said, tracing a route with one calloused finger, they'd have pulled back to the eastern garrison. Fort Cale. It's fortified, defensible, supplies for a siege. They'd hold her there until the rebellion's crushed and they can finish what they started. How many soldiers at Fort Cale? Darius asked. Though he already knew. He'd built the garrison, had overseen its construction personally. 200 on a normal day, the woman said. Maybe more now if they've pulled back forces from other positions. Could be 300, could be more. 200 soldiers at minimum, possibly 300. Professional fighters in a fortified position, versus him and a handful of rebels with rusted weapons and fury. The math was getting worse by the minute, getting worse in ways that made survival look like fantasy. This is suicide, someone said from the back of the room. A young man, barely 20, eyes wide with the kind of fear that came from understanding exactly how bad the odds were. We'll die before we get through the gates. Probably, Darius agreed. He didn't believe in lying to people who were willing to die for you. But I'm going anyway. She's there, probably in a cell, probably terrified, and I'm not leaving her, not again, not ever again. He looked around at the faces watching him, desperate, hopeful, scared, young and old, scarred and whole. People who'd been invisible to him when he was king, people Lyanna had seen when he'd been too busy ruling to notice they existed. The rest of you don't have to come, he said. This isn't your fight. You freed me. That's more than I deserved, more than I had any right to ask. Go, hide, survive, live to see whatever comes next. We didn't break you out just to watch you throw your life away on a suicide run, the scarred woman said. I'm not throwing it away, Darius said. Each word careful, deliberate. I'm spending it on something that matters, on someone who showed me what actual power looks like. Not control, not dominance, not sitting on a throne and expecting obedience, but caring about people, seeing them, helping them not because you want something, but because it's the right thing to do. He paused, let the words settle. That's what she did, he continued. For months while I was playing king and making smart choices and protecting an empire that ground people into dust. She walked into your towns and your villages and your lives, and she helped. Asked for nothing, expected nothing, just helped because you mattered to her, because every life had value. The room was silent, listening. So yes, Darius said, going to Fort Cale is probably suicide. The math is terrible. The odds are worse. But she's there and I'm not leaving her to rot while I run and hide. I did that once, 3 months ago. Chose the smart play over the right one, and it nearly destroyed me. I'm not making that mistake twice. His eyes swept the room, met every gaze, held them. You can come with me or you can stay here, he said. Either way, I'm going. Either way, I'm getting her out or dying in the attempt. That's the choice. That's all the choice there is. Silence. Heavy, charged with something that felt like electricity before a storm. Then the scarred woman picked up a weapon, a mace with spikes that had been sharpened recently, lovingly, like whoever owned it had been waiting for a chance to use it. I'm in, she said. Her voice was rough. Final. She helped my daughter when the fever took her, sat with her for 3 days. Didn't have to. Did it anyway. I owe her. One by one, the others followed. Not all of them. The young man who'd called it suicide stayed behind. A few others. Eyes down, ashamed but not enough to override survival instinct. But most picked up weapons and stood ready, stood waiting, not because they thought they'd win, but because sometimes the choice to fight mattered more than the outcome. Sometimes bearing witness to injustice with violence was the only honest response. Sometimes you fought because not fighting meant becoming the kind of person who could watch evil happen and do nothing. This is what real power looks like, Darius realized as he watched them arm themselves with rusted weapons and grim determination. Not the ability to command through fear, not sitting on a throne and expecting obedience because of the crown on your head, but inspiring people to follow you into hell because they believe what you're fighting for matters, because they've seen you make the hard choice. Because they trust that you'll bleed alongside them instead of sending them to die while you watch from safety. Lyanna had built this. with nothing but compassion and consistency. She'd shown these people that someone cared, that their lives had value beyond what they could produce for the Empire. And now they were willing to die to help save hers. That was legacy. That was impact. That mattered more than any empire he'd ever ruled from an obsidian throne. They moved through the city under cover of smoke and chaos. Fires provided light and distraction. The garrison was on the eastern edge, Fort Kyle, a stone fortress that had stood for 2 centuries, built to withstand sieges from external armies, designed by military engineers who understood geometry and killing fields and how to make stone into an unbreakable barrier, not designed to deal with threats from within, not expecting the desperate and the damned to come calling with revolution in their hearts. But it was still a fortress, still had walls 30 feet high and soldiers trained to defend them, still had murder holes and killing zones and every advantage that architecture could provide. Darius crouched behind the rubble of a collapsed building and studied the garrison through the smoke. The main gate was closed, barred with iron thick enough to stop a battering ram, guards on the walls with crossbows, torches lighting every approach, turning the open ground before the gate into a stage where anyone approaching would be visible, targetable, dead. No way in without being seen. No way to sneak through or trick their way inside. No clever strategy that would let them bypass the walls and avoid the killing ground. Just violence. Direct, brutal, honest. The only language fortresses understood when you didn't have siege weapons or time. "We need a distraction," the scarred woman said. Her voice was low, tactical. Something to pull guards away from the gate, split their attention. "Give us a chance." "I'll be the distraction," Darius said. "That's suicide." "Everything about this is suicide," Darius replied. His voice was calm. "Certain. At least this way I control the timing. At least this way I'm useful." He stood before anyone could argue, stepped out from behind the rubble into the open ground before the garrison. 50 yards of empty space, kill zone, designed specifically to give defenders clear shots at anyone approaching, designed to turn courage into corpses. He walked across it like he owned it, like he was still king, and this was still his fortress, and these were still his soldiers who wouldn't dare raise a weapon against him. The guards on the wall saw him immediately, shouted, pointed, raised crossbows, trained them on his chest with the kind of precision that came from endless drills. Darius kept walking, slow, steady, his hands at his sides, weapons visible but not drawn, not threatening, just present, just inevitable. This is what it means to have nothing left to lose, he thought, as crossbow bolts tracked his movement. You stop caring about survival and start caring about impact, about making your last moments count for something more than just breathing, about spending your life instead of hoarding it. A figure appeared on the wall above the gate, familiar even at this distance. Lord Revan, head of the council, the careful man, the predictable man who'd become unpredictable the moment power was available. "Darius," he called down. His voice was tired, disappointed, like a father watching a son make the same mistake repeatedly. "You should have run while you had the chance, should have disappeared into the chaos. We'd have stopped looking eventually." "I did run," Darius called back, his voice carried across the empty ground. "Ran all the way here. Funny how running keeps bringing me back to the same place." "And where's that?" Revan asked. "To her," Darius said simply. "Where's Lyanna?" "Safe. Under guard. Waiting to be exiled once we've dealt with this rebellion. Once we've dealt with you, let her go and I'll surrender," Darius said. The words came out flat. Factual. A transaction. No fight. No bloodshed. No more bodies. Just me for her. Fair trade. Revan shook his head slowly, sadly. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Darius. You're wounded, outnumbered, surrounded. You have nothing to bargain with." "I have this," Darius said, gesturing to the city behind him, to the fires, to the chaos. "I have a rebellion that won't stop just because you kill me. You think executing me ends this?" "It might," Revan said. "You're the symbol, the rejected king fighting for his mate, the romantic figure at the center of the story. Kill you, and the romance dies. The rebellion loses its figurehead. People go back to their lives. I'm not the figurehead," Darius said. His voice was certain, clear. "She is. Lyanna. She's the one who showed these people that they mattered, that their lives had value beyond what they could produce for the empire, that someone gave a damn whether they lived or died. I just made the mistake of rejecting her, and then the bigger mistake of trying to fix it. And now you'll die for those mistakes, Revan said. There was genuine sadness in his voice, real regret. It didn't have to be this way, Darius. You could have walked away, could have let her go, could have been the king the empire needed instead of the man you wanted to be. Could have, Darius agreed. Should have, if we're talking about smart choices. But I didn't. I chose her. I chose being human over being a symbol. And I'd make that choice again. Every time. Even knowing how it ends. Then you know how this ends, Revan said. I do, Darius said. But knowing the ending doesn't change the choice. Doesn't make it wrong. Just makes it mine. Behind him, hidden in the smoke and rubble, he could hear his people moving, getting into position, waiting for the signal, waiting for him to buy them the opening they needed. Last chance, Revan said. His hand was on his sword. Surrender. Face trial. Let us do this legally. Let the law handle this instead of more violence. Legal doesn't mean just, Darius said, each word deliberate. You staged a coup, burned out my supporters, put me in a cage in the public square and called it restoration of order. You want to talk to me about legality? About proper procedure? You abandoned both the moment you decided I was too compromised to rule. I wanted to avoid more bloodshed, Revan said. His voice was rising now, frustrated. Still want to, but you keep pushing, keep making this harder than it needs to be. Then let her go, Darius said. Simple. Direct. That's all I want. That's all I'm asking. Let her go and I'll stop pushing. Can't do that, Revan said. He drew his sword. The blade caught torchlight and held it. She's part of this now. Complicit. Whether she wanted to be or not. Then we're done talking, Darius said. He drew his sword, the signal. Behind him, the rebels erupted from cover, screaming, charging, a wave of desperate fury crashing against stone walls. 20 people against a fortress, 20 rusted weapons against 200 professional soldiers. The math was impossible, the outcome predetermined. They charged anyway. The garrison responded instantly. Crossbows fired, bolts rained down like steel rain, bodies fell. The first rebel went down with a bolt through her throat. The second took one to the chest. The third made it 3 more steps before his legs gave out. But the others kept coming, kept pushing forward, kept dying to buy time, to create chaos, to give Darius the opening he needed. This is what sacrifice looks like, Darius thought as he sprinted toward the gate. Not noble, not clean, not the sanitized version you get in stories. Just people choosing to spend their lives on something they believed mattered. Trading breathing for meaning, trading safety for purpose. He hit the gate at full speed, shifted halfway, let the wolf out, claws extended, strength surging. The wood splintered under the impact but held, iron reinforcements, designed for exactly this kind of assault. Crossbow bolts slammed into his back, his shoulder, his leg. Pain bloomed like flowers made of fire. Silver burned through his system, made his vision swim, made his muscles seize. He ignored it, hit the gate again, harder, faster, putting everything into it, every ounce of strength, every drop of desperation. The wood cracked, groaned, started to give. Above him, Revan's voice, shouting orders, commanding soldiers, organizing the defense. Soldiers poured down from the walls, coming for him, swords drawn, murder in their eyes, professional killers doing their job. But the gate was breaking, splintering, just needed a little more, just needed him to ignore the pain and the blood loss and the silver poisoning and hit it one more time. Darius pulled back, gathered everything he had left, every ounce of strength that hadn't bled out onto the ground. Every drop of fury at a world that said you couldn't choose love over duty. Every moment of regret for choices made and time wasted and a woman he'd rejected because he was too scared to be vulnerable. And he hit the gate one final time. It exploded inward. Wood and iron and 2 centuries of engineering giving up under force and desperation and the absolute refusal to accept that some barriers couldn't be broken. He was through. Inside the garrison, wounded, bleeding from a dozen places, silver burning through his veins like liquid fire. But inside. Soldiers closed in from every direction, swords drawn, shields raised. A professional response to an incursion, textbook. Efficient. designed to overwhelm and eliminate threats. Darius bared his teeth and met them. There's a moment in every fight where you realize you're going to lose, where the math becomes clear and the outcome becomes certain, where you understand that no amount of skill or fury or desperation is going to change the fundamental equation. Most people panic in that moment, try to run, try to negotiate, try to find some way out that doesn't involve accepting the inevitable. Darius went the other direction, leaned into it, embraced it. If he was going to die here in this fortress that used to be his, he'd make it cost them, make them remember, make them understand that killing him wasn't the same as breaking him. The first soldier came at him high, overhead strike, powerful but predictable. Darius went low. Under the blade, claws found the gap in armor at the hip, hot blood sprayed, arterial, fatal. The soldier went down screaming. The second came from the side. Sword thrust aimed at his ribs. Darius caught the blade on his stolen sword. Steel screamed against steel. He pushed it wide, stepped inside the guard. Headbutt to the face, cartilage crunched, nose broke, blood exploded. The man staggered back, clutching his face. Third and fourth came together. Coordinated. Professional. The kind of teamwork that came from drilling together for years. Darius shifted fully. Let the wolf take over completely. Let instinct replace strategy where thinking was too slow. Teeth found throats, claws found eyes, blood sprayed hot and copper tasting. Pain became background noise. Wounds became abstractions. Numbers on a ledger he'd settle later if there was a later. There was only forward, only through, only her. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose because that's exactly what he was. No throne to protect, no empire to preserve, no reputation to maintain. Just a man trying to reach a woman before the world killed them both. The soldiers fell back, regrouped, professional, disciplined. They came at him with spears now, using reach, trying to keep him at distance where claws couldn't reach and teeth couldn't bite. Darius grabbed a spear mid-thrust, yanked hard. The soldier on the other end wasn't expecting it. Came forward off balance, into range. Darius ended him with claws to the throat, took the spear, used it against the others, stabbing, sweeping, making them respect the reach. This wasn't strategy, wasn't technique, wasn't the kind of fighting they taught in training yards. Just violence. Pure, simple, honest. The kind of fighting that happened when civilization burned away and only survival remained. And through it all, one thought, one purpose beating in time with his heart. Find her, get her out. Nothing else matters. Not the pain, not the blood, not the dying, just her. A soldier got lucky. Blade slipped past his guard while he was dealing with two others, carved a line across his ribs. Deep, painful. He could feel it scraping bone, could feel hot blood pouring down his side. He stumbled, nearly went down, vision graying at the edges. Another soldier pressed the advantage, sword raised for a killing blow, eyes gleaming with the certainty of victory. The blade never landed. The soldier jerked, looked down at the arrow sprouting from his chest like a strange flower, looked confused, fell forward, dead before he hit the ground. Darius spun. Through the broken gate, he could see the rebels, the ones who'd survived the initial charge. They'd secured the entrance, were pouring in now, fighting with makeshift weapons and fury against professional soldiers, buying him time he didn't deserve and couldn't waste. He ran deeper into the garrison. Through corridors he'd walked 1,000 times when this was still his fortress, when these were still his soldiers, when he thought control and power were the same thing and that ruling meant never being vulnerable. The cells were in the lowest level, 3 floors down, underground where screams wouldn't reach the surface. He took stairs 4 at a time, ignored the burning in his legs, ignored the blood loss making him dizzy, ignored the silver poisoning spreading through his system like poison, ignored everything except forward, except down, except her. A guard stepped into his path at the second landing, drew his sword, recognized Darius, hesitated. The hesitation cost him his life. Darius didn't slow down, didn't stop, didn't apologize or explain or give the man a chance to reconsider, just ended the threat and kept moving because every second mattered and mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford. More guards, more fighting, more bodies left cooling in his wake. And then he was there. The cell block, doors lining both sides, iron and steel, and the smell of fear and despair and human suffering. Which one? Too many cells. Too much time to check them all. Time he didn't have. Time measured in heartbeats, and the sound of soldiers coming down the stairs behind him. He roared her name, heard it echo off stone walls, heard it crack with desperation and fear, and something that might have been prayer if he believed in such things. A sound, faint, distant, from the far end of the corridor. Here, I'm here. Her voice, hoarse, scared, exhausted, but alive, still fighting. He ran, found the door. Third from the end, locked with mechanisms designed to be unpickable, built to keep people in regardless of their strength or desperation. He tore it open with his bare hands, the lock ripped free from the stone. The hinges screamed in protest. The door fell inward and hit the floor with a sound like thunder. And there she was. Liana sat against the far wall, still in the torn gray dress from the village, still bruised and exhausted and hollow-eyed from captivity. But her spine was straight, her eyes were clear, her jaw was set with the kind of defiance that said, "You can cage me, but you can't break me." "You came," she said, like she'd known he would, but hadn't let herself believe it, like hope was too dangerous to embrace fully. "Always," he said. His voice was rough, raw, scraped clean of anything except truth, every time, no matter what, no matter how bad the odds or how certain the death. Always. She stood on shaking legs, crossed to him. Her hands went to his face, traced the new wounds, the blood, the damage he'd taken getting to her. "You're dying," she said quietly. "You're bleeding out." "The silver—" "Not dead yet?" he interrupted. "Still standing, still moving. That's enough." "You're a fool," she said. But her fingers were gentle on his face. Loving. This was suicide. Coming here, fighting through them all. "You should have run. Tried that once," he said. "Didn't work. Spent 3 months dying inside. This is better. This is honest." Footsteps, boots on stone, echoing down the stairwell, getting closer. Soldiers coming, a lot of them by the sound of it. They'd run out of time. Darius pulled Liana close, felt her heart beating against his chest, felt the bond sing with their proximity, even here at the end, even dying. "Can you run?" he asked. "Can you?" she countered. Fair question. He was wounded in at least a dozen places he could count, and probably more he couldn't. Blood loss making him dizzy, silver poisoning spreading through his veins, vision swimming, legs barely holding him upright. "Probably not," he admitted. "But I'm going to anyway, because staying means dying without a fight, and I'm done with that." "Then I guess we both are," she said. Her voice was steady, strong, ready. They ran, back through corridors painted with blood, past bodies of soldiers and rebels alike, through fighting that had spread throughout the garrison. No front lines anymore, no organization, just chaos, violence, desperation meeting desperation in tight spaces. The way out was blocked. Soldiers had formed a defensive line at the main corridor, shields locked, spears ready. Professional formation, disciplined, the kind of barrier that was designed to be impassable. Darius stopped, breathing hard, each breath feeling like it might be the last. Options running out like sand through fingers. Behind them, more soldiers. Ahead, the shield wall, trapped between stone and steel and men who wanted them dead. This is what happens when you fight power with just fury, he thought. Eventually the professionals close in and the math catches up and it ends. Not with glory, not with victory, just with blood on stone and bodies added to the count. The shield wall parted. A figure stepped through. Revan, sword drawn but held low. Not threatening yet, just ready. Face carved from stone and regret, and the particular weariness of men who'd made hard choices and had to live with them. "It's over, Darius," he said quietly. Almost gently. "You fought well. Better than I expected. Lasted longer than you should have. But it's over now." Darius put himself between Revan and Liana. "It's not over until I'm dead." "That can be arranged," Revan said. His voice was flat, factual. "But it doesn't have to be this way. Surrender, both of you. I'll make it quick, clean, honorable. The best I can offer under the circumstances." "Honor," Darius said. His laugh was bitter, broken, tasting of blood. "You don't get to talk to me about honor. You staged a coup, betrayed your king, burned out anyone who stood by me, killed people who trusted you." "I saved the Empire," Revan corrected. His voice was harder now. From a king too compromised to rule, too unstable to make rational decisions. You did this to yourself, Darius. The moment you rejected her, the moment you let the bond poison you, you destroyed what we built, Darius shot back. Everything we worked for, all the infrastructure, the trade routes, the alliances. You burned it all for power. I burned nothing, Revan said. You did that. The moment you chose her over the Empire, the moment you decided being human mattered more than being king. Being human does matter more than being king, Darius said, each word deliberate. Certain. I was king for 11 years, perfect, controlled, every decision calculated. And it made me into something I hated, something that could look at my mate and choose politics over connection, choose fear over love. Then you should have abdicated, Revan said. Stepped down cleanly, transferred power properly, not abandoned the throne in chaos and forced us to clean up your mess. Would you have let me? Darius demanded. If I'd come to the council and said I wanted to step down to be with her, would you have allowed it? Or would you have found reasons why I couldn't? Why the Empire needed me? Why duty had to come first? Revan's silence was answer enough, confirmation of what they both knew. Exactly, Darius said. You wanted me to be king until it was convenient for you to replace me. That's not loyalty, Revan. That's just waiting for an opportunity. Just power recognizing when it's time to change hands. The shield wall tightened, spears lowered, ready to advance, ready to finish this. Last chance, Revan said. His sword came up. Ready position, surrender. Darius looked at Lyanna, at her exhausted face and fierce eyes, at the woman who'd changed everything without meaning to, just by existing, just by being someone worth burning the world for. He looked at the soldiers, at Revan, at the fortress that used to be his, and the empire that used to be his, and the life that used to be his. And he made his choice. No, he said quietly. Then you'll die here, Revan said. Both of you. In this corridor, away from the light. Is that really how you want this to end? Doesn't matter how it ends, Darius said. His hand found Lyanna's, squeezed, felt her squeeze back. Matters how we face it, together, honest, human. He raised his sword, bared his teeth, felt the wolf surge one last time. You want us dead? He said. His voice was steady, clear, final. Come take it. Find out what it costs to kill someone with nothing left to lose. Revan's expression flickered. Something that might have been respect, or pity, or regret for what had to happen next. He raised his sword. The signal. The shield wall advanced, and Darius Valor, former king, rejected mate, rebel, man who'd lost everything and found something worth dying for, charged one final time. The shield wall broke against them like a wave against stone. It's not because Darius was stronger, not because the rebels fought better, but because sometimes desperation hits a frequency that professional training can't match. Sometimes people with nothing left to lose become more dangerous than people fighting for pay. Darius hit the line with everything he had left. Claws tore through shields, teeth found gaps in armor. Blood sprayed hot across stone walls that had seen centuries of violence and would see centuries more. Beside him, Lyanna fought with a ferocity that surprised them both. She'd grabbed a fallen soldier's sword. Didn't know proper technique. Didn't need to. Just swung with the kind of wild abandon that came from watching the man you loved bleed out while trying to save you. The soldiers fell back. Not routed, not broken, just repositioning, creating space, letting the wounded former king exhaust himself against steel and numbers. Smart tactics, patient tactics, the kind that won wars. Darius didn't have patience left, didn't have time, could feel his body shutting down, the silver poisoning spreading, the blood loss catching up, vision tunneling, legs weakening. He pushed forward anyway, carved a path through bodies and steel, made it 3 more steps, 5, 10. Then his legs gave out. He hit the ground hard, tasted blood, felt his sword clatter away across stone, felt hands grabbing him, soldiers surrounding him, spears pointed at his throat. This is it, he thought. This is how it ends. On stone. In blood. Away from light. Not the worst ending, not the best. Just an ending. Lyanna screamed his name, tried to reach him, got grabbed by 2 soldiers, held back, watching, helpless. Their eyes met across 10 feet of space that might as well have been miles. I'm sorry, he mouthed. Sorry I couldn't get you out. Sorry, this is how it ends. Her face crumpled, not with fear, with fury, with absolute refusal to accept this. Revan stepped forward, stood over Darius, sword raised, ready to end it. Any last words? He asked. His voice was tired, sad, like executing former kings was just another task on a long list. Darius looked up at him, at the man he'd trusted, the man who'd betrayed him, the man who thought he was saving the empire by destroying the king. Just one question, Darius said. His voice was rough, weak. Each word cost blood. Was it worth it? All of this? The coup, the deaths, the burning city. Did you get what you wanted? Revan's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary. That's not an answer, Darius said. That's an excuse. I asked if it was worth it. Revan stared at him for a long moment. Then quietly, I don't know yet. Ask me in 10 years when we see what grows from the ashes. Fair enough, Darius said. He closed his eyes. Ready. Do it. The blade came down and stopped. Darius opened his eyes. Revan stood frozen, sword trembling, face twisted with something that looked like pain. I can't, he said quietly. His voice cracked. I thought I could, but I can't. Why not? Darius asked. Because you're right, Revan said. Each word sounded like it was being torn out of him. About all of it. The empire. The choices. The cost of power. I staged a coup to save something that might not be worth saving. Killed people who trusted me. Became exactly what I accused you of being. Then put the sword down, Darius said. Can't do that either, Revan said. His laugh was bitter. Broken. Because if I let you live, the council will have my head. The soldiers will mutiny. Everything falls apart. But if I kill you, I become the kind of man who executes former kings for choosing love. The kind of man who makes that the crime. He lowered the sword, not sheathing it, just lowering it to his side, looking lost, looking human for the first time since this started. So what do we do? He asked. Not as a lord to a former king, just as one tired man to another. Darius tried to push himself up, failed, settled for sitting. Blood pooled around him, too much blood. The kind of amount that said time was measured in minutes now. You let her go, he said. His voice was getting weaker, harder to force words out. You let her walk out of here. Give her supplies, safe passage. Whatever life the lunar fracture leaves her, let her have it without looking over her shoulder. And you? Revan asked. I'm dying anyway, Darius said. The silver, the blood loss. Give me 10 minutes and nature handles your problem for you. That's not... It's the only option that doesn't make you a murderer, Darius interrupted. Let me bleed out. Tell the council I died in the fighting. Everyone wins, you get stability, she gets freedom. I get to die knowing she's safe. No, Lyanna said. Her voice cut through the corridor like a blade. No, I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice, Darius said. Tried to turn to look at her. Couldn't manage it. Vision graying out. This is the play. Only one that works. I don't care if it works, Lyanna said. She was fighting against the soldiers holding her, struggling, desperate. I'm not watching you die alone on this floor. I'm not living with that. You have to, Darius said. Please, just this once. Let me do something right. Let me save you, even if I can't save myself. The corridor went quiet. Just breathing. Just the sound of blood dripping on stone. Just the weight of choices about to be made. Then Revan spoke. There might be another way, he said slowly. Carefully. Like he was working it out as he spoke. Darius looked at him. Vision swimming. What way? The lunar fracture, Revan said. You said she has it. Said it's terminal. It is, Darius confirmed. No cure, just deterioration. But there are researchers, Revan said, in the northern territories, working on treatments. Experimental, dangerous. But they've had some success slowing the progression. Why would you tell me this? Darius asked. Why help? Because watching you two fight for each other made me remember something I'd forgotten, Revan said quietly. That sometimes the things we do for love matter more than the things we do for power. That maybe the empire I'm trying to save isn't worth as much as I thought if it can't make room for that. He sheathed his sword, addressed the soldiers. Stand down, he ordered. All of you, this is over. My lord? One of them questioned. The former king. is dying, Revan cut him off. From wounds sustained in the rebellion. We're going to let him die with dignity instead of adding execution to the list of things we did wrong today. He turned back to Darius. But you're not dying here, he said. We're getting you to the Northern Territories, to the researchers, both of you. They might be able to save her, might be able to save you too if we move fast enough. Why? Darius asked. His voice was barely a whisper now. Why change sides now? I'm not changing sides, Revan said. I'm just remembering that there are more important things than sides. That sometimes mercy matters more than justice. That sometimes letting people choose love over duty is the right call, even if it destabilizes everything. This is what power looks like when it chooses to be human, Darius thought, as darkness crept in from the edges. When it decides that control isn't the same as rightness. When it lets go. Lyanna was beside him suddenly. The soldiers had released her. She cradled his head in her lap. Her tears fell on his face. Stay with me, she whispered. Please, just a little longer. Trying, he managed, but it's hard. Everything's hard. Then rest, she said. I'll carry you for a while. You can't carry me, he said. You're dying too. Then we'll carry each other, she said. Like we should have from the start. Consciousness faded. Came back. Faded again. He was being lifted, moved, carried through corridors, upstairs, toward light. Voices around him. Revan issuing orders, soldiers responding, organized evacuation, getting them out of the garrison, away from the city, toward the Northern Territories and research facilities that might be able to stop death. Might not, but might. The bond hummed, weak, fading, but still there, still connecting them. Worth it, Darius thought as darkness took him. All of it, every choice, every consequence, worth it for this. He woke to sunlight and pain, not the blinding pain of silver poisoning and blood loss, the duller pain of healing, of wounds closed but still tender, of a body that had been pushed past breaking and was slowly, resentfully knitting itself back together. He was in a bed, clean sheets, soft mattress, the smell of antiseptic and mountain air. A research facility, he realized. They'd made it to the Northern Territories. He tried to sit up. Managed about 6 inches before his body informed him that sitting was absolutely not happening yet. Easy, a voice said. You've been out for 3 days. Give yourself time. Lyanna appeared in his field of vision. She looked better. Not healthy. The lunar fracture didn't allow healthy, but better than she'd been in the garrison cell. Color in her cheeks, clarity in her eyes. You're alive, he said. His voice was rough from disuse. So are you, she replied. Barely. The healer said it was close. The silver nearly killed you. Nearly doesn't count, Darius said, tried to smile. Wasn't sure if he managed it. She sat on the edge of the bed, took his hand. Her touch was warm. Real. They're working on a treatment, she said quietly. For the lunar fracture. It's experimental. Might not work. But it's something. How long? He asked. Best case? They can slow the progression. Give me years instead of months. Worst case, it does nothing and I forget you anyway. Then we'll make the years count, Darius said. However many we get. You gave up everything for this, Lyanna said. Her voice was small. Wounded. The Empire. The throne. Your legacy. All for a woman who might not even remember you in a few years. I didn't give up anything that mattered, Darius said. Just things I thought mattered. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment. Then, what happens now? Now we figure out who we are without the crown and the empire and all the weight we've been carrying, Darius said. We find a place. Build something small, something real, something that doesn't require us to be anything except human. And if the treatment doesn't work, if I forget, then I'll remember for both of us, Darius said. I'll tell you stories, show you pictures, remind you every day that you were loved, that you mattered, that choosing you was the best decision I ever made. Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them away. I'm scared, she whispered. Me too, Darius admitted, terrified. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. A knock on the door. Revan entered. He looked older than Darius remembered, worn, like the past few days had aged him years. You're awake, he said. Good. We need to talk. About what? Darius asked. About what comes next, Revan said. The Empire is in chaos, the rebellion spread. The Council is fractured. Half of them want to hunt you down. The other half want to pretend you never existed. And you? Darius asked. I want to know if you're planning to come back, Revan said bluntly. To reclaim the throne. To finish what the rebellion started. No, Darius said. The word came out certain. Final. I'm done with thrones, done with empires, done with all of it. You're just going to walk away? Let it burn? It was burning before I left, Darius said. I just stopped trying to control the flames. Let someone else rule. Someone who wants it more than I do. Someone who hasn't learned how poisonous it is. It doesn't work that way, Revan said. You're still the symbol. The rejected king who chose love. People will follow you, will fight for you, whether you want them to or not. Then tell them not to, Darius said. Tell them I'm dead if you need to. Tell them whatever story makes the Empire stable. I don't care about legacy anymore. Don't care about being remembered. Just want to live whatever time we have left without looking over my shoulder. Revan studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, he said. I'll tell them you died in the fighting, heroically, defending your mate. Give you a story worth telling even if it's not true. It is true, Lyanna said quietly. He did die. The man who was king, the man who chose duty over everything, he died in that corridor. This is someone else. Someone better. Revan's expression softened. Maybe you're right. Maybe we all died a little in that corridor. He turned to leave, stopped at the door. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, I'm sorry. For the coup. For the betrayal. For all of it. Are you? Darius asked. Or are you just sorry it got messy? Both, Revan admitted. I thought I was saving the Empire. Thought I was doing the right thing. Turns out right and necessary aren't always the same. No, Darius said. They're not. But at least you learned. That's more than most people manage. Revan left. The door closed. The room fell quiet. So, Lyanna said after a while, what do we do now? Now we heal, Darius said. We take the treatment. We see if it works, and then we find a place far from cities and empires and thrones. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere we can just be. And if people come looking for you, then we run, Darius said simply. Together, always together. She leaned down, kissed him gently. The bond surged with the contact, still there, still strong, still everything. I love you, she whispered against his lips. Even if I forget everything else, I'll remember that. You won't have to remember alone, Darius said. I'll be there, every day, reminding you. Promise? Promise. They stayed like that for a while, just holding each other, just breathing, just being alive when they had no right to be. Outside, the world continued to burn and rebuild and change. The Empire would find a new ruler. The rebellion would either succeed or fail. History would be written by whoever held the pen when the dust settled. None of it mattered to Darius anymore. He'd learned something in that corridor. Something fundamental about power and love and what it meant to be human. Power was a lie. A seductive lie that said control mattered, that dominance meant strength, that ruling others was the highest achievement. But love was truth, messy, complicated, vulnerable, but true in a way that power could never be. He'd spent 11 years chasing the lie, building an empire on control and fear and the careful management of weakness. And it had nearly destroyed him. But choosing truth, choosing her, had saved him. Not in the dramatic way stories promised, not with victory and glory and triumph over enemies, just saved him by making him human again, by reminding him that vulnerability wasn't weakness, that needing someone wasn't failure, that loving someone enough to burn the world for them wasn't madness. It was the sanest thing he'd ever done. 6 months later, they stood on a cliff overlooking the northern sea. The treatment had worked, mostly. Lyanna still had moments where memory slipped, where she'd look at him with confusion before recognition returned. But the progression had slowed. The researchers thought she might have years, maybe decades if they were lucky. They'd built a small house, stone and wood. Nothing fancy, just shelter, just home. No servants, no guards, no throne. Just them and the life they were building together. Darius had changed, The wolf in him had settled, quieted. He still shifted sometimes, still felt the pull of instinct, but it didn't control him anymore, didn't define him. He'd learned to be more than just an alpha, more than just a king, more than just the sum of his power. He'd learned to be a partner, an equal, a man who could admit weakness and ask for help and accept that he didn't have to be strong every moment of every day. Lyanna had changed too. The disease had taken things from her, memories, skills, certainty. But it had also given her something, a kind of presence, a living in the moment quality that came from knowing your time was limited. She didn't waste moments on worry, didn't spend energy on fear, just lived, fully, completely. They'd made a life, small, quiet, invisible to the empire that had once defined them both. Sometimes travelers passed through, brought news of the world they'd left behind. The empire had stabilized under new leadership. The rebellion had fizzled. Revan had stepped down from the council, gone to the border territories to try to fix some of the damage imperial expansion had caused. Darius listened to the news with detached interest, like hearing about a place he'd visited once but had no intention of returning to. That wasn't his world anymore. This was his world. Stone house on a cliff, woman beside him, waves crashing below, simple, real. Enough. "Do you ever regret it?" Lyanna asked. She was standing beside him, hand in his, looking out at the endless water. "Which part?" Darius asked. "All of it," she said, "rejecting me, choosing me, burning down your empire, walking away from everything you built." He thought about it, really thought, turned the question over in his mind and examined it from every angle. "I regret rejecting you," he said finally. "That was fear, cowardice, the worst choice I ever made. But choosing you? Walking away from the empire? No, never. Best decision of my life. Even knowing what it cost? Especially knowing what it cost," Darius said, "because the cost revealed what mattered, stripped away everything that was just performance, just role-playing, just me trying to be what I thought I was supposed to be instead of who I actually was." "And who are you?" Lyanna asked. "Without the crown, without the power. Who is Darius Valor?" "Just a man," Darius said, "who loves you, who chose you, who's going to stand beside you for however long we get. That's enough. That's everything." She leaned against him. He put his arm around her. They stood there as the sun set over water and painted the sky in colors that had no names. This is what victory looks like, Darius thought. Not conquest, not dominance, not standing over enemies and accepting surrender. Just this. Quiet moment. Shared breath. Two people who'd fought through hell and come out the other side still holding hands. The Empire would remember him as the king who fell, who chose love over duty, who abandoned his throne and let chaos reign. History wouldn't be kind, wouldn't understand, would reduce him to a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting personal desire over responsibility. He didn't care, because history was written by people who valued power over truth, who thought ruling mattered more than living, who couldn't imagine that walking away from the throne was the bravest thing a king could do. But Lyanna would remember differently, would remember that he'd fought for her, bled for her, died, and come back for her. And when the disease finally took those memories, and it would, eventually, the treatment could only slow the inevitable. He'd be there to give them back, to tell her the story of how they met, how he'd rejected her, how he'd realized his mistake, how he'd burned down an empire to get her back. He'd tell her every day if he had to, every hour, every moment, because some stories were worth repeating, some loves were worth fighting for, some choices defined you more than any crown ever could. "Do you think they'll ever understand?" Lyanna asked. "The people who hear the story, do you think they'll understand why you did it?" "No," Darius said honestly. "Most of them won't. They'll think I was weak, compromised, that the bond poisoned my judgment. And, does that bother you?" "It would have once," Darius admitted, "when I was king, when I cared about legacy and how history would remember me. But now? No. Let them think what they want. I know the truth, which is, that strength isn't about never breaking," Darius said. "It's about what you choose to fight for when you do break. It's about being honest enough to admit when you're wrong, vulnerable enough to change, human enough to choose love even when it costs you everything." He turned to face her, took both her hands. "I was the strongest when I was king," he said. "I could command armies, bend nations, make the world move according to my will. But I was also the weakest, because I was terrified of needing anyone, terrified of being vulnerable, terrified of admitting that I couldn't do it alone. And now I know that needing you doesn't make me weak, Darius said. It makes me human. And being human is the strongest thing I've ever been. Liana's eyes filled with tears. I'm going to forget this conversation, she said quietly. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. The disease will take it. Then I'll remind you, Darius said. I'll tell you what I said. I'll tell you what you said. I'll make sure you know that you were loved, that you mattered, that choosing you was the only choice that ever made sense. Promise? Promise. They stood on the cliff as night fell and stars emerged. Two people who'd lost everything and found each other in the wreckage. Two people who'd chosen truth over power and paid the price and found it worth paying. The empire would fall eventually. All empires did. The throne would pass to new rulers. The story would be told and retold until truth became legend, became myth. But this moment, this quiet, perfect moment, would remain, would be theirs, would matter more than any empire or crown or throne ever could, because in the end, power was temporary, empires were temporary, even memory was temporary. But love, real, honest, vulnerable love, that was eternal. Not in the romantic sense, not in some fairy tale promise of forever, but in the sense that it changed you, fundamentally, irreversibly, made you into someone different, someone better, someone who understood that being human meant being breakable and choosing to love anyway. Darius Valor had been many things: prince, king, alpha, ruler of empires. But standing on that cliff with Liana's hand in his, he was finally the one thing that mattered: human, flawed, vulnerable, mortal, and absolutely, completely free.